Kentaro loved these two like they were his own family. He's a star salesman at a massive tech company and is totally crushing it. One morning he brings some breakfast over to. He thought back to losing his parents in that horrible accident years ago, and now Max and Ninny are the only ones he has left. After feeding them, Kentaro chills with some tea before whipping up a killer meal for himself. Right as he takes a huge bite, he's actually shocked by how amazing the food tastes. He turns to Max and Ninny and asks if they're finally done eating. After breakfast, he hits a workout with his pets and vents about his job, and even though it's not really a hobby, he's actually having a blast. Then he tells them both it's finally time to head out for a walk. While they're just hanging out and walking together, Kentaro sees how much Max and Ninny love their walks, but he's low-key wondering if Ninny even counts as a walker since she moves so incredibly slow. They're heading right for the crosswalk. Out of nowhere, Kentaro hears a truck engine roaring toward him, and before he can even blink, it slams right into him. Everything goes dark, and while Kantaro's eyes are still shut, he hears someone mention that there's a huge problem. Like everything was supposed to happen a totally different way. He wakes up in a totally weird spot, wearing clothes he's never seen before, and hears this super annoying voice. The sun is blazing down right in front of them. Quintero looks around and sees super bright flowers everywhere with massive mountains looming in the distance. He gets a total rush just seeing that massive open sky. He stops for a second to check out his eye gear. He's literally wondering if this is all a dream when a voice suddenly calls out to see if Kentaro can hear it. Kenta whipped his head around and nearly jumped out of his skin when he saw a squirrel just chilling right there. Out of nowhere, a squirrel actually pops up to say hello, and dropped the news that Kenta was officially dead. As the squirrel started to fade away, Kenta asked what it meant, and the squirrel just casually dropped the news that he'd actually died in an accident. Kenta was totally freaked out and told them he was actually there, but the squirrel explained that the world was about to end and needed a hero, so it brought Kenta back to life as a huge thank you. Because he jumped into this reality, everything was finally fixed, and his home world was totally peaceful just because he was there. The squirrel asked if he understood, but Kenta was still super lost and admitted he had no clue what was going on. The squirrel explained that Kent was a rival who actually helped save the world, so now he's supposed to just live here and be happy. Before Kenta could even wrap his head around it, the squirrel just straight up vanished. Kent stood up and grumbled that the squirrel really should have explained things better before just ditching him. Right as he spun around, he looked over and spotted a bag sitting right there next to him. He opened it up to see what was inside and found water, a blanket, a rain poncho, and 6 small bags of mystery supplies. He found piles of gold and silver coins, wondering if this was the local cash, along with some dried meat, veggies, and a mysterious little box tucked away. It's basically food that's totally off limits to taste. It was super sweet and tasted amazing, so he decided to take his sweet time and really soak in every second of it. Once he was done, he dug through another bag and scored a stash of dry beans, fruit, crackers, rock salt, and coffee beans. Kenta kept digging through the bag and found a lantern, a lighter, a pot set, a mini stove, a tiny kettle, and even plates, cups, spoons, and forks. He even found a coffee pot and wondered if he could brew a cup. But it was the exact same one from his old school, making him seriously question what was actually going on. He was super hyped about all the useful loot, but even though he still hadn't found any fresh underwear, he figured he could survive camping out with what he had. That's when he spotted a ball. That totally made him think back to Max and Ninny. He kept wondering if they were even okay, and if he'd ever get another shot at seeing them and making them happy again. He felt totally crushed when it hit him that he might never see them ever again. With his mind made up, he finally decided to make his move. Out of nowhere, he spots a monster in the distance and totally freaks out as the thing starts charging straight at him crazy fast. Kent tried to make a run for it, but that beast was just way too fast. He reached right for his sword. That monster was closing in on him fast. Kendra tripped and slammed into the ground in total panic, thinking he was a goner for sure. He thought his second life was over before it even started, but right as he braced for the end, the beast just started licking. He was totally hit with a massive wave of love and warmth. He was totally shocked when the beast actually spoke up and called him master. He froze right there, staring in total shock, until he heard a voice he totally recognized. It was Maxed. He took another look and yeah, it was definitely him. He explained he was about to be dragged off to a shelter, and thanked Kenta for saving him just in time. Kenta got totally choked up as all those old memories came rushing back. Max used to be his old boss's favorite dog, and Kent felt so relieved to finally have his loyal buddy back. A lady at the funeral home had told him that since nobody wanted to adopt Max, Kent finally stops moping and apologizes for dragging Max away so fast, but Max tells him it's totally fine and that he's actually super happy. Now it was finally time to pay their master back for everything he did for them. Kenta's still totally stuck on what Max was actually trying to say. He was totally blindsided when this massive cat jumped out of nowhere and started licking him. The cat actually started talking, saying she'd never forget how he saved her from the freezing cold, and Kenta completely froze as he realized this cat was actually Nini. He remembered finding Nini back when she was just a stray cat hanging out in his work parking lot. After thinking it over, he decided to bring her home and keep her. But since Max was... Nini calls Kenta her beloved master and swears she'll protect him no matter what. Kenta couldn't help himself and pulled her into a big hug, totally blown away by how soft and fluffy her fur felt. He was beyond hyped to finally have both of his pets back by his side. Right then, the squirrel popped back up and said he was finally going to explain everything. Kenta glared at the squirrel, totally annoyed, and told him to stop leaving his stuff right in the middle of the way. The squirrel was totally chill and said he already prepped their gear, but they'd still need to scavenge or buy the rest with the money they'd have to work for. Shamil the squirrel points toward the mountains and tells them that path leads straight to the big cities where they can finally join the Adventurers Guild as Beastmasters. Kento thought about the guild and that Beastmaster title, feeling like he was living in a straight-up RPG. He asked Shamil if he really understood why Kent was so stressed about the struggle of reading in this new world. Shamu promised him that every race here speaks the same language, and he'd already fixed the system so Kenta could understand every word. Kenta finally let out a huge breath, knowing he was actually going to pull this off. Shamgal kept explaining that this is actually a parallel world, just a little bit different from their own. Kenta literally asked out loud if this was even real since it looked way too much like his own world. Shamgal explains that nowhere is ever truly safe, and even in a place like this, danger is always lurking. Kenta started wondering if he could actually just be free and live his own life without any rules, finally finding some peace with Max and Nini. Shamu promises Kent he can do anything, whether it's buying a house to chill or becoming a legendary beastmaster with his own students to live life exactly how he wants. Finally feeling free, he decides to head out and explore every inch of this brand new world. He introduces himself as Samuel Delacia and says he's going to be watching over them, telling Kenta to just hit him up if they ever need help. Kenta cracked up and joked that Samuel's name sounded way too fancy. Shem fires back and reveals that he's actually the one who created this entire world. Kenta just shrugged it off like it was nothing when Shanuel dropped that massive bombshell. He's just left wondering what all that crazy imagination is actually supposed to mean. Samuel could tell Kent wasn't buying it and asked if he really doubted him, explaining that he actually picked this cute look for a very good reason. Out of nowhere, all that shame morphs into a massive dragon. Kento scrambled back in total terror, and seeing his reaction, Shamel bragged that he could transform into literally any form he wanted. Shamuel let out a wild roar and blasted the whole area with a massive wave of fire. As soon as the flames finally cleared out, he transformed right back into his Kenta's form. Shamile walked right up to him looking exactly like his double, and a totally freaked out Kenta told him to stop and change back to normal. Shamuel let out a little laugh as he shifted right back into his classic squirrel form. Shamil explains that humans aren't the only ones around, since the world is full of magic beasts and gem monsters that literally turn into jewels when you take them down. Kenta was curious about the gems, so Shamil explained they're basically monster fuel, and that once a beast is defeated, it just turns back into its original gem form. Kenta was dying to know what made magical beasts different from gem monsters, so he finally asked. Sham explains that gem monsters don't actually have real bodies, and just turn into shiny jewels. Meat, skin, bones, organs, you name it. Shamville told Kent to loot every single piece he could find. He said both gem monsters and magic beasts sell for a ton of cash. With Kent's Beastmaster powers, he could turn them into allies, and he was totally hyped about that plan. Shamal told him to grab a slime for the trip, and the second he finished talking, he just vanished. Ken mentioned how Shamil was super hard to catch, and then he started wondering what was up with that slime. Max told Ken to hop on his back to stay safe and move faster, and when Ken asked if he was sure, Max told him it was no problem at all. Kent hopped onto his back. Max told him to hold on tight so he wouldn't fall, and then Max just started booking it. Kenta was totally hyped by the insane speed, while Max told him they were heading straight for the slimest. They ran for a whole day before hitting a forest where Samuel said gym monsters spawn like crazy, making it the perfect spot to start hunting. It took a minute, but they finally tracked down the slime nest. Shamble says these nests are actually super common all along the ley lines. Kenta wondered if it was actually a total struggle just to make it this far. He asks about the people living there, but Sham just fires back, asking if he seriously didn't know the whole world is about to fall apart. He said that even if people knew the truth, they wouldn't do a single thing to stop it. Suddenly, things were about to get way worse and leave everyone in total shock, while Kenta just called them out for being super reckless. But he figured there was no point in stressing over it anymore. He stood up and pointed out how the slimes were spawning in totally insane numbers. He wondered if Max and Nini were scared of them, but Max just said they'd keep their distance for now. Sham pops onto Kenta's shoulder and tells him to chill because he's actually super strong. He tells Kenta to treat this like a tutorial and just wreck those slimes with total confidence. Shamil just said he was teaching him the basic controls. Kenta hit a slide and ended up right in front of the German side. Shamuel warns him not to slice the slimes yet since they need to wear them down first, and Kent just snaps that he should have mentioned that sooner. He whacked another slime to make it even weaker, and snatched it up right as it tried to make a run for it. Kenta asks Shamil what he's supposed to do with the slime, and Shamil tells him that to tame it, he just needs to talk to it and ask it to join him. Kent said yes and checked in with the slime that was dying to join his squad. The slime was super hyped to join and greeted Kenta by calling him Master. Ken even mentioned that the voice sounded super cute and totally unique. He even wondered where the heck it came from, but Shamgal just told him to keep holding on to that slime. Right as Kenta did that, the slime hooked him up with powers to store, preserve, and clean stuff, promising it would work its absolute hardest for him. Kenta wonders if he's finally leveling up, and when Shamo tells him he's getting warm, he gets super hyped to see what this slime can actually do. Shame explains that his storage can hold basically anything as long as it's not alive, and the preservation feature makes sure nothing ever rots or goes bad. He told Quinta to take the gem he grabbed earlier and toss it right into the slime. The slime melts right into Kent's body, telling him it can stash away as much loot as he wants and pull it back out whenever he needs it. Shemuel kept explaining how purification scrubs away the grime, making Kenta wonder if it was basically just like doing a load of laundry. He said that keeping everything totally clean and fresh was actually a super cool power. He started freaking out that storing monster corpses might be different than keeping food, but Shamgal told him to stop overthinking it since he can just purify everything anyway. The slime mask told Kenta he better take real good care of it. Kent grabbed another slime and said they were finally good to go, naming the clear one Aqua and the light pink one Sakura. Sakura took charge of the food while Aqua handled everything else, and Shamuel was super hyped about how well their team was doing. Kent asks how much further it is, and Shamo tells him they'll arrive tomorrow evening if they keep walking, but if they start sprinting, they can make it by tonight. Kenta was nervous about camping in the wild, but Shamul promised his pets would keep all the monsters far away. Shamingo noticed the sun was still high in the sky, and told the group they should go after something way bigger. Kenta pointed at a bird but froze because the thing was massive, so Shay Mill reminded him that he's always been a natural at catching things fast. Samuel was hyped to tame the hawk and told them to move, but Kenta held back because that bird looked absolutely massive in the air, making it look like there was absolutely no way to catch it. Right then, a hawk zooms right over Ken, making him jump. He was seriously wondering if birds could actually be that massive. Shamil tells Kenta to be the decoy and points him right at Max and Nini. Max and Nini were totally down to back him up, but Kenta was super annoyed when he found out he had to be the bait. Sham tells him to chill because that was just the tutorial, but Kenta's already asking how much longer this warm-up is gonna last. Nini jumped in and said if the hawk attacks Kenta while he's solo, she'll just smack it out of the sky for him to tame. But Kenta thought that sounded way too sketchy. As the hawk zoomed in, he was totally hyped but also freaking out, so he begged Max and Nini to watch his back. Finally, the hawk dived out of the sky and lunged straight for Kenta. Nini strikes first and sends the hawk crashing straight to the dirt. Max doesn't stop there and goes straight for the hawk too. Shamville barked at Kenta to tame that thing right this second. Ken straight up asks the hawk if it wants to join the squad. And just like that, the hawk was totally down to follow him. Once it was tamed, the hawk shrunk down and landed right on Kent's hand. She introduces herself as Falco. She told him she could grow giant size to carry him and said it was awesome to meet him. Shamil told Kenta he'd finally tamed his first 5 pets and needed to craft his Beastmaster emblem, making Kenta wonder if there were other cool types of emblems out there. Samuel explained that the mark proves he tamed these beasts, and it makes them stand out from regular monsters the second they get attacked. Shamu literally leaps off the page right in front of Kenta and asks him to design a sick emblem that actually fits his vibe. "We've got Kenta agreed and drew one," once he showed it to Shamil. Shamil told him to pick out a name, so Kenta came up with Kentaro Yamada. Sham points out that since most people don't even have last names, a nickname is way better anyway. Then Kento actually suggested Ken for the job. Shamul nods and says his name. Then he makes something pop out of thin air and tells Kentat to show him his hand. Shamel then presses the item right into Kindi's hand. Then Shamble told Kenta to push his favorite spot on the emblem, and the second Kenta did. The second he touched it, the emblem burned itself right onto that spot. Then the sun went down and the night finally took over. Kent decided to just set up camp right there. He sat down and checked out the lantern, wondering if it was a new item, and if it even had enough oil to light up. Shame tells Aqua to pop that gem from earlier into the lighter, promising to hook him up with another one for the lantern. Kenta pops one gem into the lighter and the other one right into the lantern. He realized the lighter was actually working now. He was having a total blast, and it was clear those gems were actually powering everything up. Shamble explains that these gems are actually made of mana, the energy inside every living thing, and if you run out of it, you're basically dead. Kenta asked if they needed anything else, but Shane told him food was the only priority since those Johns would keep them going for a few days. Max and Ninny jumped in, saying they'd hunt on their own and just soak up mana from the monsters they took down. Kenta was totally hyped by how crazy this was, thinking about how everyone used to count on him, and even though he was relieved, he couldn't help but feel a little lonely. Because looking after these creatures meant their entire lives were literally in his hands. He said his own dinner was just some basic dried meat and dried veggies. It's literally just water and rock salt! Every single one of his pets was totally knocked out. Kenta absolutely crushed his meal and loved every single bite. He couldn't believe how some basic meat and veggies could taste this freaking good. He reached for his dessert and realized the whole thing was still totally full, even though he literally just ate one the day before. Shem explains that this is the logic bonus, which goes up by one every single day, and he says it's super easy to handle. Right then, a slime starts cleaning up the whole place, and Kenta is honestly blown away by it. He said it was officially his first night in this brand new world. He thought back to his old life, wondering if he'd been a total headache for his boss and friends. Luckily, it looked like he was actually going to have a blast in this crazy new world. He just really hoped everyone back in his old world was doing okay. Shamal is about to totally wreck Kenta. Kent let out a huge yawn and a stretch, and right then, Ninny was there to say what's up. Suddenly, Max starts licking him and claims he never even woke up, but he's definitely not buying that. He really wanted to wash up, but the town was just way too far away. Out of nowhere, a slime latches onto him and he starts feeling super weird. He just straight up asks Sakura what she's even doing. He noticed his skin was suddenly super smooth, and wondered if this was the whole purification thing kicking in. He thanks Sakura and tells her he's definitely going to be counting on her again. Ken realized he just couldn't survive without his morning coffee. But man, it had been a total eternity since he actually used an old-school percolator. He hadn't even checked out the coffee beans yet. He looks down at his water bottle and is totally shocked to see it's filled right to the top. He used some of it yesterday, but Sham explains that the water bottle actually refills itself automatically. Kenta was totally blown away by how useful it was, even if it was a little creepy, and Shamble immediately asked him to spill all the details. Kenta explains that you can survive a week without food, but you'll drop dead in just a few days without water, making that bottle their literal lifeline. As the water bubbled and boiled, it turned a deep brown, showing the coffee was finally ready to go. Once he finished brewing the coffee, Kent takes a sip and is shocked by how mild it is, feeling even lighter than a basic cup of drip coffee. He double-checked his bag, wondering if they should just make a run for the highway. Right then, he grabs his hand and yanks him away. Ken asks Ninny what she's even doing. He couldn't believe his eyes because Ninny actually had a snake in her mouth. He was totally freaking out and yelled at her to stay back. Shame warns him that poison is a total death sentence for humans, and tells Kenta to just tame the snake. But Kenta shuts that down instantly because he's not touching that thing. But Sham is going to push him to get a move on fast. Shaking like crazy, he reached out to touch the snake's head and asked if it wanted to join the squad. The snake was totally down, and right then, it started growing into a massive beast. Kenton names it Serpan and gives it a friendly hello. Then he just stomps right on her pants. He shrunk the snake down to a tiny size and joked that it actually looked pretty cute now. Serpan apologized and promised to stay hidden, but Ken told the snake not to worry since he's not scary at all when he's that small. Shamult told Kenta he'd totally modified Serpan into a top-tier poison type called the Green Big Python, and Kenta admitted that giant venomous snakes are honestly terrifying. Shamul told him to chill out, because as long as Serpan was there, no other snakes would dare come near them. Kenta agreed and told her they needed to lock back in, so when Nini offered him a ride on her back, he totally went for it. He jumps onto Nini and they bolt forward as she tells him to hold on for dear life. They were zooming so fast Kent felt like he was riding Max, so he told Nini to chill out and run a bit smoother. They finally hit the main road and spotted a carriage with a bunch of people. Cantor points out that the town has to be right around the corner. He headed straight for the group with his pets right by his side. Everyone completely lost their minds the second they saw those monsters. Kenta saw they were freaking out, so he quickly shouted that these monsters were his pets and told everyone not to attack. This guy whipped out his sword just to protect himself. Another guy says he's never seen monsters like this before, and he's super into the Red King and those Hellhound versions. The third guy spoke up, saying nobody can tame monsters like that, and asked Kenta what kind of beastmaster he's supposed to be. Shemuel leaned in and told Kenta that Beastmasters are super rare these days, leaving Kenta looking totally confused. They asked if the world was finally falling apart, and Shamble told them it was going to take a crazy long time to fix. Kenta told them to chill because everything was going to be okay. Then he ordered them to put their swords away. He asked for a guide to the town, and one of the guys asked if Kenta was heading there to get some rest. Kent had no clue what was happening, but he still said yes. While they were on the move, he caught the group gossiping about the monsters and wondering how the rest of the world would react to them. Kenta's starting to think he really should have just stayed hidden. The guy asks Kenta where he's from and demands to see his ID. He steps in and tells Kenta to just say he's from the Shadowcut Mountains. Kenta said it again, and the whole squad was left totally stunned. He gave a quick "my bad" for the holdup. They all wave goodbye and tell him to stay safe on his big trip. As they head out, Kenta can't stop thinking about those Shadowcut Mountains. But Shuram warns him it's actually a jungle packed with insanely powerful monsters. This place was buzzing with massive energy and home to legendary monsters, so regular adventurers stayed far away. Ken says the place sounds terrifying and asks if it'll scare everyone away. But Shuram tells him the beasts he caught are so insanely strong that there's nothing to worry about. He told Kenta that if he ever felt nervous, he should just say he's from there to keep everyone chill, and then they kept moving forward. And he finally catches a glimpse of a town way off in the distance. He asked if there was a bathroom around, and Shemuel told him there definitely was. They headed down the road like everything was chill, but every traveler they passed looked totally freaked out just by seeing them. Right as they finally hit the town gates, the guards were actually super chill and gave them a polite welcome. A guard freaked out over how massive Kenta's beasts were and looked ready to attack. But Kenta just calmly told him they were his summons. The guard asks for Kenta's ID, but Kenta just straight up admits he doesn't have one. The guard says it's 1 silver coin to get in, and a copper for any big gear or beasts. So Kent asks about the fee for Falco, but the guard tells him he's actually free. He handed over the coins they asked for. The guard warned Kenta to keep his summoned beasts under control, and Kenta just gave him a quick nod. The second they stepped into the town, everyone was shaking with fear the second they saw Kenta and his monsters. Kenta saw the walls earlier and thought this place would be small, but it's actually massive and feels just like a total tourist trap. His first goal was to track down the Adventurers Guild, but Shemuel straight up admitted he had no clue where it was. Kenta was totally fed up, muttering to himself that he'd just have to handle everything on his own from now on. Right then, he caught sight of that same guy he passed on the trail earlier. He recognized the guy instantly, and the man explained he was from the Adventurers Guild before asking Kenta if he wanted to join. Ken tells him he's looking for the guild, so the guy offers to show him around, but Ken gets suspicious and asks why he's being so helpful. The guy was super interested in Kentis's familiars, and said since they both came from the Shadowcut Mountains, they were basically fellow adventurers. The guy realized Kentis was way too clueless, so he knew it was the perfect time to totally play him. Kenta just laughed and told the guy he's way too direct. He shook the guy's hand to accept the help, and the man introduced himself as Hector. The second they finally made it to the guild, the adventurers nearby are totally freaked out by Kenta's beasts. Hector stepped up and told everyone to chill, explaining that the Kentis creatures are totally loyal to him, and there's no reason to freak out. Everyone's panicking, but one guy thinks it's a joke, while another shows off a tiny monster on his shoulder and says it's the biggest thing he can handle. Ken told everyone to chill, swearing these beasts were totally on his side and asking them to put their weapons down. Hector steps forward and tells everyone they've got nothing to worry about. Hector told Ken to hurry up, so they rushed over to the front desk where Ken told the lady he wanted to sign up as an adventurer. The receptionist was totally shocked that he was actually serious about joining their guild. She thanked him and handed over a form for him to fill out. Kenta starts filling out the paperwork, and when the receptionist asks if he's with Hector, Hector confirms it right away. He pointed out how risky it was to let everyone know Kenta was wandering the streets alone. But he was just glad Kenta made the right call, and the receptionist thanked Hector for the help. She's totally blown away that anyone could tame monsters this huge, and she straight up calls Kenta a legendary beastmaster. Kenta was super curious, so he asked what the real difference was between a tamer and a beastmaster. Sham explains that while beginners are just beastmasters and pros carve emblems, Kenta has already evolved way past being a regular tamer. As Ken filled out the form, he felt like the gods had totally ghosted him, but at least he could read and write the language like a pro. Kenta finished the form, slid it over to the receptionist, and asked if he was all set. She checked it out and was totally hooked the second she saw the mention of Shadow Slash. She told him that signing up was going to cost him exactly 1 silver coin. He told Kent to put his hand right on the magic circle on the desk, and the second he did, she quickly wrapped his hand up in a cloth. Then this crazy light started blasting out from underneath. Suddenly, a card pops right out of the magic circle. She hands Kenta his official registration card, and he's totally blown away by it. He checked out the card, muttering to himself about how this whole system even worked. She cut him off, teasing that he shouldn't be making jokes like that when he's got two massive monsters right by his side. Kenta asked where he could crash with his massive monsters, and since no normal inn was big enough, the receptionist told him they could just stay at the guild's lodging. Kenta was totally stunned and asked if the place was even okay to stay in, but the receptionist explained that while it wasn't fancy, he'd get a bed, a garden, and water. He just had to find his own food. He let out a frustrated sigh but ended up agreeing to the deal. He said it was totally fine, so the receptionist asked for 1 silver coin for the night and another one for those huge beasts. Kent paid for 10 whole days so he could go exploring, and the receptionist got him all set up. Once the deal wrapped up, Kenta walked over to Hector to see if he was finished, thanked him, and offered to buy him dinner as a way to say thanks. Hector told Kent to ditch his bag so they could go meet up with the rest of the squad. Kenta stepped into the room and was totally blown away by how insane the place looked. It was way more epic than he ever thought it would be. Some guy told him this room used to be packed with beast tamers every single night, but now it's basically empty. He handed Kent the key and told him the water zones were all split up, so he should go ahead and explore the place. Ken heads into the pond and finds a kitchen with a spot to get water. It felt a little weird, but Samuel explained that the top part of the water was for drinking and the bottom was for washing. He warned Ken to keep all that dirty stuff out of the upper section. Samuel wrapped things up by saying he might disappear sometimes, but would always have Kenta's back, so Kenta thanked him and promised to call for help if things ever got messy. He headed out to grab some food, and a bit later, Ninny showed up to tell Kenta she'd keep an eye on things. Then she just crashed right onto her bed, and Kenta was totally losing it over how cute she looked. He pulls her into a hug and tells her that even though she's grown up, she hasn't changed one bit. A bit later, Kenta met up with Hector, who pointed out that the number of adventurers was seriously starting to drop. One of Hector's guys told Kenta he could hang out in the outdoor standing area, and Kenta thanked them for the invite. A lady with a beer walked up to ask if those giant monsters were his family, and Kenton just nodded, promising he'd keep them in line so she wouldn't have to worry. She flashed a smile and said it was honestly wild how friendly Max was being. Hector led Kenta to the dining hall where a massive buffet was waiting, and Kenta realized he could just grab whatever he wanted to eat. Hector raises his beer with a loud cheer and introduces himself as a total pro with a sword. A young kid named Lime introduces himself as the Spearmaster, while an older dude named Balloon steps up with his axe to greet Kenta. This lady named France introduces herself as a sorcerer, and Kenta is so blown away by all the talent around him that he starts wondering if he can learn magic too. Everyone started digging into their food. Kent thought the food was straight up amazing. He was actually having a blast because even in this crazy new world, everything felt just like home. The meat had a nice herbal kick that made him wonder what he was actually eating, but he kept his mouth shut while he enjoyed the rich soup and that super familiar buttery flavor. The rest of the squad was just chilling and grabbing some drinks. He kept pushing Kenta to keep drinking because he felt like they were nowhere near finished with their meal. Hector told them that being an adventurer means total freedom, so they can pick any quest they want as long as they're ready for the danger. There were tons of jobs to find rare gems and materials, and obviously, plenty of monster hunting to go around. Hector told Kenta to start with some easy jobs just to get the hang of how things work. He reminded Kenta that big familiars like Max have to wear a collar, but Kenta said he already had a ribbon for him. Hector thought it was a solid quick fix, but he warned Kenta to get a real collar next time, and Kenta was totally down with that. Max notices the smell of the booze is getting super intense, so Kent asks the bartender how much for 5, and the guy says it'll only cost him 1 gold coin total. Kent stood up to head out, but Hector stopped him and asked if he was really leaving already. Kenta just flashed a grin and told Hector to go wild and have a blast, promising he'd catch up later as he headed back to his room while the rest of the crew kept the party going. That's when Kenter finally showed back up. Ninny welcomed him in and he took a seat right next to the bed. The next morning rolls around. Shamel shakes him awake and tells him it's already morning. He told him to stop crashing like he was camping out, but Kenta groggily just groaned that his whole body was super stiff and sore. Then he turned to Sakura and asked her to help him feel better. Once she finished, he actually felt way more energized than he thought he would. Ken headed straight to the kitchen to brew some coffee. He took a sip and couldn't believe how amazing it tasted. He wondered if there was any coffee in this world, and Shamo told him that even with all the wild stuff happening, coffee was actually pretty common. Kent heard about a morning market in the square from Hector and the guys, so he asked if everyone was down to go check it out. Nini was just sitting on the bed, looking way more quiet and shut off than she usually is. Kent called her out for being a shut-in, but she totally denied it. so he told her to tag along to show the townspeople they're actually harmless. The second they finally hit the market, Kenta was totally blown away by all the different stuff they had for sale. He looked at the massive mountain of loot and knew it was finally time to start grabbing some ingredients. He took a bite of the fruit and realized it was actually super sweet. He grabs some ingredients and asks the shopkeeper for the best way to eat them, and the guy tells him they're amazing no matter what, grilled, boiled, or even totally raw. He spots a burger, takes a bite, and the spices hit so hard that it tastes absolutely incredible. After that, he just kicked back with a cup of coffee. He was honestly so hyped to have finally found all this cool stuff. He grabbed some food he actually recognized, saying it's exactly what you'd expect from a world right next door. He grabbed a ton of gear and started stashing it all right inside Sakura. He tossed a massive haul of fruit, veggies, coffee, and even burgers into storage, and Saka promised she'd totally handle the rest. Next, he headed straight into the part of the market where all the butchers were, and the whole place was straight up freezing. Once he grabs a bunch of stuff, the shopkeeper warns him he better finish every single bite. That's when she finally realized Kento was the legendary Beastmaster everyone was hyping up, and he got totally embarrassed. She kept talking about how her grandpa was a timber trader, and slimes used to hop all over their house, but when Kenta showed her his own slime, she was stunned because she'd never actually seen a creature like that before. She reached out to touch it and realized it wasn't just super smart, it was also smooth, shiny, and totally adorable, while Kent explained exactly where he picked it up. Just as he was about to head out, she thanked him and told him to come back soon. Kenton's pantry was totally stuffed with supplies, so he decided to treat himself to a massive steak that night. He decided to go hunt for some food and maybe snag some gems along the way, and Nini was totally down for the plan. They finally hit the forest, and Sham is about to lead them straight to the brown-horn rabbit's den. Kenta asks if Samuel Fahey can actually handle things, while Max, who's also heading out to hunt, wishes him luck and tells Nini to do the same. Kenta actually wondered if the ravis would taste good, but Shamo reminded him that since he's a gem monster, it definitely wouldn't be the same. Kenta was hunting in a spot covered in holes, but Shamble explained the whole place was actually a burrow. Kenta told Nini to shrink down right away while Shamuel kept explaining that beasts and monsters are actually totally different things. These beasts were actually just normal animals until the ley lines mutated them, letting them grow but putting a hard limit on how massive they could get. But get this, these gem monsters were actually just normal jewels at first, and they can grow or shrink to any size they want. Whatever gem they started as basically decided what kind of monster they'd turn into. Kenta got the point and asked if they should wait for the rabbit to hop out, but Shamil said to just let him transform inside the hole. If he dove right in, the rabbit would definitely pop out, and Kent was totally down for the plan. As soon as Sham dives into that hole, they just stayed posted up right outside, waiting. A super chill rabbit finally popped out, and Kenta was totally blown away. He's left wondering how it's even possible to ignore a hole that massive. Shame explains this thing is a variant and wants to call for backup, but Ken admits he's still way too new to this whole fighting thing. Serpent suddenly grew massive so he could snatch up that giant rabbit. At the same time, the rest of Kent's familiars jumped into the fight and started wrecking the other rabbits. Kenta was super hyped with how everything turned out. They even managed to snag some seriously epic loot along the way. Right as they finished up, Max finally showed up, and Serpan told him that everything was pretty much handled. Nini headed out to start the hunt, and Kenta told the rest of the squad it was time for them to get moving too. Shamble said it'd take forever for the rabbits to hatch and he was done waiting, but right then, a tiny rabbit popped out of the hole. Kenta wondered if it was the same monster, but Shame confirmed this one was actually brand new and had just hatched. Kenton realized the rabbit was totally freaked out, so he actually stopped to say sorry to it. He straight up asked if it wanted to join his squad. He named it Lapan and gave it a super friendly welcome. Shamgal warned that this variant is only going to get way stronger as time goes on. Kenta squished his face right into the rabbit's fur, totally losing it over how soft and adorable the little guy was. He flopped down, just wondering when they'd finally head home. Shamiel told him they had until the sun went down, so there was zero rush. It hit Kenta that this was actually... Shama told him he'd finally put on enough muscle to be average, but his stamina was still pretty weak. Shamiel told him to hang tough because it was all just part of the training, and he even gave Kenta props for doing an awesome job on his first try. Shamuel Sam showed Kenta this amazing new world and told him he just wanted him to have a blast and live a long, happy life. Kenta couldn't tell if Samuel was a hero or a villain, but Samuel promised he was totally one of the good guys. The sun is setting just as they finally make it back to the town gates. One of the guards mentioned that Kenta had already linked up with the rest of the guild. Kent told the guards he'd be counting on them for a while, and they looked totally stoked to hear it. Kenta and his familiars rolled into town and totally blew everyone's minds. but he couldn't shake the feeling that those distant screams were finally fading away. He meets the receptionist who asks if he's there to sell gems, and Ken tells her he's actually got a massive pile to trade in. Some guy nearby shouted that Kenta was carrying a massive haul of gems and told him to show them off, so Kenta finally revealed the loot. Everyone watching was totally losing their minds because there were just so many of them. Kent takes a seat just as an old man shows up to help the lady sort through all those gems. Then the old man says it's time to talk business and break down exactly how much each gem is worth. Kenta's jaw hit the floor when he heard the total was over 50 gold coins, but the old man explained that gems are super rare, and he's counting on Kenta to be his main supplier from now on. He even told Kenta to just hit him up if he ran into any trouble. Kenta asks where he can score a map, and while the lady points him toward the guild, the old man steps up and just gives him one for free. Ken thanked him and immediately cracked open the map. He just said he'd check it out later. Kenta and his familiars head outside, and while Shuram says he'd love for him to just fit in already, Kenta totally shuts him down. They finally make it back to their room. Kenton headed straight for the kitchen to whip up some food. He whipped out the chunk of meat the shopkeeper called beefy, and decided to roll with the clerk's advice. He gives the meat a quick tap to soften it up and break the fibers, and since he's fresh out of pepper, he just cranks up the salt instead. Then he grabs this thing that smells just like a potato, so he figures it's the real deal and starts peeling it to boil it up. He took a tiny bite and realized it really was just a potato. He drained the water and tossed the potatoes in salt until they turned super fluffy. He sizzled that meat until both sides were cooked to total perfection. The whole room was suddenly filled with an amazing smell. The second he takes a bite, Kenta thought it tasted incredible, and those thick slices were so tender they basically melted. This was the ultimate steak, and it tasted exactly like the real deal. Max spoke up, asking if that wasn't already just a normal part of their world. Once they finished stuffing their faces, the whole group finally crashed for the night. The rabbit tries to wake Kenta up, but he's so out of it he thinks it's Shenmue, and tells him to leave him alone. But once he realized it really was the rabbit, he jumped to his feet. Kenta headed out with his familiars for a quick coffee break, and after loving every sip, he decided it was finally time to check out all those mysterious items he'd collected. Kenta hit up a shop to find what he was looking for, but he couldn't find it anywhere. The shopkeeper came out to help but totally lost it when he saw Kenta's familiars, so Kenta just asked if the guy had any folding tables and chairs. The guy confirmed they were safe inside and that the beasts couldn't get to them, so Ken told the group to just wait out there. As they walked inside, the guy pointed out how fancy Kentus's familiars looked, but Kenta just said they were super cute. The guy leads Kent to the furniture and asks if he's heading outside, suggesting he just turn them into cards to make carrying them way easier. Kenta thought about using a slime for storage, but Samuel told him those things are actually super rare. He said it was totally cool and that he'd just grab one table for himself. After that, the guy showed off the chairs and Ken asked to buy the small one. He just made the slime carry all his gear like a personal backpack. Then Kenta hit up another shop that was totally packed with all kinds of armor and gear. He asked Nini if she wanted a collar, and she was totally down for a fresh new look. Right then, the shopkeeper rushes out looking totally freaked out, wondering if a monster is hiding in the streets. Kenta apologized and explained the monsters were just his familiars. And that's when the guy realized he was actually talking to the town's legendary Beastmaster. He admitted the whole thing was actually pretty creepy, and Ken mentioned he was looking for a collar for Nini, but everything in the shop was way too small. The guy asked to touch the beasts so he could use their size to create something epic, and Kent agreed, saying it would act like a total angel. This guy used a desk to figure out the perfect size for Nini's collar. Then out of nowhere, a snake pops right out of Nini's fur, and the guy was totally blown away. He straight up said there was no way he could handle that snake. Kenta just laughed and said he totally forgot the snake always hides in Nini's collar, insisting it's actually super sweet, but the guy asked if he was for real. He'd never seen a creature like this before, and he was totally shocked by how skinny Serpan actually looked. He told Kenta to pick his favorite color for the collar, saying it would eventually blend in and look awesome. Nini picked out a color, and when she told Kenta, he said that awesome shade of crimson was totally perfect. He picked out 2 more colors, and the guy looked totally stoked about it. Kenta asked for a bag on Max's collar so Lapan wouldn't fall off, and he even requested some shoulder pads to help Falco Vistap out. The guy starts measuring for the Max collar, and tells Kenta he can make it in any shape he wants, so Kenta thanks him, and says it feels like this dude can pull off literally anything. This guy says he's from the workshop city of Bison, which is why he's so cocky about his skills, but Kenta's over here wondering if the whole place is actually in. The guy recommended leather for the shoulder guard, promising it'd be a total masterpiece, and even offered to throw in some extra parts to build a perch. He handed over a single gold coin as a down payment, and promised to pay the rest once the job was finished. Just as they were heading out, the guy told them to swing back in 3 days for their gear, so Ken thanked him one last time and they took off. He loaded up on all kinds of gear and bragged about his massive haul. They'd just have to go hunt for more gems to cover all those extra costs. While they kept moving, Kenta spotted something and wondered if it was actually cheese. He walks up to the stall, spots some milk, and asks the lady if they actually drink it. She says yeah, and if he comes by early, they even have fresh cheese. Kent buys a few, promises to come back, and honestly, that friendly vibe is just one of his best traits. A little while later, Kenta was busy firing off a message to Max. As the whole group headed toward their goal, Ken started thinking back to everything that went down 3 hours ago. Shummel suggested they hunt the brown Hardrock next, and even though it was going to be a massive grind, the payout was way higher. Ken checked the map and laughed at the weird name, knowing it was time to take a much closer look. He tracked down Restum and started figuring out the world's layout, even though Shamuel pointed out the map was still pretty basic. Kent told him to stop hating since the guild approved the map, but Shamgal just asked if this was really the best they could do. Kenta was totally confused why they didn't just fill in the details themselves. Shamgal told him it was all good, but then he mentioned a special bonus and told Kenta to shut his eyes. He had no choice but to do exactly what he was told. A second later, he finally snapped his eyes open. He noticed the map was suddenly packed with way more detail. Shane explains that his appraisal eye lets him see the upgraded map, and Ken is so hyped he calls him a total lifesaver. Ken checks the map and spots the ocean to the west, along with the island nations and Bison, the city famous for its dwarf workshops. That's exactly where the breeding grounds were, right in the middle of those tough brown rocks. They're finally getting super close to the spot. Kent said the place looked like a total wasteland, maybe even a volcano zone, and you couldn't help but wonder where those gem monsters were hiding. Right as he's processing that, the whole ground starts shaking like crazy. He looked around and saw a ton of hard brown rocks scattered all over the place. Shami summons a hammer and hands it over to Kenta, telling him to use it to smash those rocks to pieces. Kento felt like that hammer weighed a literal ton. Sham explains that once those rocks break, they'll peel away for an opening, so Kenta just follows the plan and finally swings his hammer with everything he's got. He kept complaining about how hard it was to handle while he smashed right through the rocks. Suddenly, a bunch of little monsters started popping out. Max and Ninny totally crushed them in a flash. Kenton looked closer and realized the gems stuck in the rocks were actually massive. He just kept on swinging while his familiars totally shredded every monster in sight. A bit later, Kenta hit a rock that was way tougher than the rest, and now his hand is just throbbing with crazy pain. He asks Shamil how to spot it, but Shamil is just confused why Kenta can't see it for himself. This actually let Kenta unlock even more of his insane appraisal eye skill. Now he could see the gem monsters way better, and Shamble explained that Kent's skill gate actually lets him see exactly what they want. Kenta just kept on smashing those rocks into pieces, all while his familiars were busy wrecking every monster in sight. After a while, Ken was totally wiped out and called for a break, admitting he was hitting his absolute limit. And it's getting way worse because these monsters are spawning like crazy. His hands were totally numb, and you have to wonder if the town even realizes this massive army is closing in on them. Shame points out how fragile humans are, and he jokes that he's so weak he can't even hold a spoon right now. Shenmula tells them to go grab some orange gloss moss for a potion, but when Ken asks why he isn't doing it himself, Shenmula just says he doesn't even need the stuff. Kent got back on his feet, and Max said he'd keep a steady pace. Max can't even lie down on his back anymore. It was actually super comfy and had a ton of bounce. It didn't take long before he was totally out cold. A little while later, Sham finally gets around to waking him up. Ken slowly blinks his eyes open, feeling totally out of it. And right in front of him, he saw this massive, deep trench. Shame tells them they're jumping into the Falco to head down the canyon where that glowing orange moss grows like crazy. Kenta thought the plan was totally crazy, but with his slimes helping him out, he managed to grab onto the Falco as it swooped down. He was like, why can't these guys just grab the moss for him? They kept pushing way deeper into the canyon. And as he slammed into the ground, it turns out Kenta was actually Jocelyn the whole time. Shamal warned Kenta to only pick the leaves and leave the roots alone, because if those roots die, the slimes will just gobble up the whole moss patch. And man, it took years for them to finally bounce back. Max and Ninny finally showed up, but Kenta was still totally frozen in shock. He asked if they were cool with heading down, and they both said they were totally down for it. Kenta started grabbing all that glowing orange moss while Shameless held out a plate for him to put it on. Right after that, Shenmule hooked Aqua and Sakura up with the powers to mix and refine stuff. They grabbed that moss and whipped it up into a powerful elixir. He handed it back to Kenta, and Shamel told him to put his hand right over the elixir. Ken felt his hand start to heal up right then and there, and just like that, the pain was totally gone. Kenta was super hyped and started grabbing way more moss right away. He gathered a massive stash all on his own and told Sakura to keep it safe for later. He turned back to grab the rest of his elixir, but it had completely vanished even though he hadn't even used it yet. Sham warns him that the ointment wears off super fast, so Ken should only whip it up when he actually needs it. Using it like a cream would make it last way longer. Kenta wondered if it was actually safe, like wax or petroleum jelly. He looked up and said they should probably get going. Shamo. Kenta was stressing that the rain in the valley would ruin everything, but Shamul told him to chill since it wasn't even going to rain there. They didn't hang out around here much, so he told them to save their energy for the night, and Kenta was totally down with that. Then he told Sakura to go ahead and set up the table and chair they just bought yesterday. Then he sat right down in the chair and said it looked totally awesome. He knew that if they just had a tent, everything would be totally perfect. He pulled out the meat and sausages, noticing they'd been bounced around a ton all day. He's chowing down and says the food is fire, but then he asks if he can get some baguette too. He's down for coffee, but tea would be even better, and he's looking for pepper since he saw it at the food stalls earlier. Once he finished his meal, Ken flopped down right between Nini and Max, and man, they were so soft and fluffy. He thanked them for sticking around and told them they should probably go get some sleep. The next morning, Kent sent Max out to hunt while he grabbed more glowing moss, and Max was totally hyped to get started. He bolted out of there so fast that Kenta was just left standing there in total shock. Right then, Nini shouts over to Kenta that she's found something totally wild, and he's dying to know what it is. Shamu mentions there's a spot nearby full of Highland chickens with super tasty meat and tells Kenta he should totally go hunt one. The guild would handle the rest, and since those feathers were worth a ton of cash, Nini was totally down for the plan. Kent turned them down, telling them it was their hunt and he wasn't gonna get in the way. Right then, Max shows up bragging about the Highland chicken he just caught, and asks Aqua if he can borrow it. He sets the chicken down, and you know he's finally ready to get serious. Kent was hyped about how massive it was, and thanked Max for the clutch catch. Nini shows up with another chicken, and Kenta is totally blown away by how well they're actually doing. He'd grabbed a ton of that glowing moss, so he decided it was finally time to head back. Kenta hops onto Falco to take off, and she tells him to just sit back because she's got the flying covered. He was having the absolute time of his life. As they soared away, he stayed on Falco, and was totally blown away by the view from up there. Then he said it was time to go find the rest of the crew. While heading into town, this kid was super hyped to finally see Max and Nini. He rushed over and pulled Nini into a massive hug. This totally freaked his mom out. They rushed right over and asked him what he was doing. She said sorry to Kenta and joked that if the monsters wanted a snack, they should leave him alone and just eat her instead. Kenta calmly explained those were just his familiars that don't hurt people, leaving the lady totally stunned. Her son started playing with Nini, totally obsessed with how insanely soft and fluffy that fur was. The woman got super curious and asked Kenta if she could touch them too, so he just gave her a quick nod. She reached out and started giving Nini some super soft pets. Ken felt a huge wave of relief seeing that some people weren't actually terrified to get close to his familiars. Once the woman and her kid take off, the town guards greet Kenta and ask if he's been traveling somewhere far, but he just tells them he was out in the wild hunting and camping. The guards were super curious and asked to pet Kent's familiars, so he totally let them. They were all smiles while giving Nini and Max some major head pats. After Kenta finishes selling his Highland chickens, an old guy who was eavesdropping asks about the guild, so Kenta tells him he heard they were the best at handling deals like this. He asked if they'd take half the chickens, and the guy was totally down for the deal. Kento then asked about trading those brown rock gems, and the old man was totally shocked. He said these gems are actually worth a ton for street lamps because they last forever and make awesome fuel, even if they aren't super bright. Since these guys had been super rare for a long time, every town treated them like total legends, starting right with the capital city of Inberg. The old guy said these gems would totally light up the town, so they agreed to finish their big meat and gem deal the next day. That night, Kenta was chilling with his familiars and thinking about how mana makes the world go round. He realized mana creates gems, and those gems pop out monsters. The gems end up as fuel. He just kept walking, finally finding some peace under the quiet moonlight. He just had to pull over and hit up a cream cheese shop. He grabbed 10 of every single kind, and the shopkeeper was totally stoked about the massive sale. Next, he grabbed some fresh bread, black pepper, and a top-tier grinder he was stoked to find, along with some extra spices, pens, and ink. He even snagged a sweet new tent for all the camping trips he had coming up. Kent was planning to hit up a new town soon, so he decided to keep stacking up gems until it was time to leave. He felt great knowing he could keep helping out the townspeople as he traveled. The next day, Shamil tells Kenta about a sick spot nearby and asks if he wants to go hunt some pill bugs or gold butterflies. The two of them didn't waste a second and headed straight for the spot. That's where they ran into a ton of massive pill bugs and totally wiped them out. Suddenly, these massive frogs show up. They quickly realized these giant caterpillars were way scarier than the snakes they fought before, making them a much bigger threat and a total nightmare to handle. Even though they were struggling, Kenta hyped up his familiars and told them to stay strong and keep on fighting. A little while later, they suddenly saw this massive butterfly. Shannon says that sometimes you just have to grind hard to grab your big chance. The gold butterflies weren't attacking, so as they floated down to the flowers, it was all up to Kenta to make his move. He told Kenta those wings sell for a fortune, so he should aim for the body instead, making Kenta wonder if the bodies were actually useful for materials too. Shamgul explained that they used Dorgon techniques to harden the butterfly's wings, turning them into beautiful crystal-clear glass. Kenta was totally shocked that the wings could turn into glass, but right then, Falco charged in and went straight for the giant butterfly. That butterfly started heading right for Kenta. He swung his sword in a blur and sliced right through the beast. He felt a total rush because that step was just so smooth. Those massive wings slammed right down on him, and he screamed for Nini to help him out. He laughed it off, but he seriously thought he was dead meat. While Nini helps him out, Kenta wonders if the wings will actually turn into glass like Shamil said, and Sakura quickly stashes them in her inventory. Right as they were catching their breath, a sudden noise made Kentis' familiars snap into battle mode. Shamuel looked totally serious as he waved Kenta back, leaving Kenta wondering if he was even needed anymore. He was just about to ask a question when he spotted a massive beetle heading straight for him. Shamel told him to back off and let the familiars handle the dirty work. Kentis' familiars weren't having it, and started complaining that he couldn't just chill while they did all the fighting. Right then, Falco charged at the beetle with total confidence, claiming it as her prize before snatching it up and holding it high. Everyone else watched with pure jealousy and complained it wasn't fair, while Falco just tossed the beetle down to the dirt. We slammed right onto the ground with a heavy thud, and it got totally skewered by its own horn right then and there. Suddenly, the beetle transforms into a massive glowing gem. This thing was way bigger than anything they'd seen before, and Shamil was hyped because those horns are worth a ton of money. It transforms into a weapon that looks totally sick with its shiny metallic finish. Sham says those hardened wings are super rare, but if you take down a tough gem monster, they drop loot you can use to forge a crazy strong sword. Ken suggests getting a sword made from those materials, so Shamu tells him he's got to find a master smith named One in Bison. Kenta was totally down for the plan, so they made Bison their next target. Later that night, they finally hauled all those gems back to the guild. Both guys were totally losing it and hyped to see so many of them. The old man says these frog lights last forever, and after making 20 gold and meat yesterday plus 10 more today, Kenton realizes they're stacking up some serious cash. The old man praised Kenta for being a total MVP and even winning the gold butterfly wings. But Kenta just said Restum helped him out first, so he was happy to pay him back. The guy hauls out a massive 50 kilos of chicken and tells Kenta he's got to carry it all back home. Kent and Sapkura teamed up to bring it back to life. While they're walking down the street, Kenton notices the lamps are way brighter than before, but Shame just tells him it's because they lit up more of them. Everyone watching was losing their minds over the glow, saying they'd been stuck in the dark for way too long. They noticed way more monsters were showing up, and everyone was saying it was finally time to start hunting again. Ken headed back to his room and announced he'd scored some Highland chickens, bread, butter, and flour for their dinner. He's gonna flatten the chicken, hit it with spices, coat it in breadcrumbs, and toast the bread in a pan to make it super crispy. He's tossing in some flour and beaten eggs to get the dish ready. Then he lets it slowly sizzle in a pan full of butter. He prepped that Highland chicken perfectly and turned it into some seriously juicy cutlets. He snags a bike and takes off. Kento was losing it over how good this tasted, especially with that perfect mix of butter and red crumbs. And man, look at how juicy and thick that chicken is. He stacks the bread and cheese right on top, turning that cutlet into one epic sandwich. He took one bite and instantly felt a massive rush of hype. He realized he was totally winning in this world, getting a taste for the good life and racking up tons of experience. Kenta headed out for a walk and hit up a shop for a drink, grabbing a ton of stuff but failing to find any tea leaves. So he spotted a sweet shop nearby and decided. He stepped inside and spotted a sign for some brand new cookie bread that looked super sweet and tasty. He bought one to give it a shot, and it turned out he was totally right. Turns out it was actually just melon bread. He's just about to head out when he hears a voice he knows and spins around to see Nini. She pulls him into a hug, totally missing that the mom and kid who first befriended him are standing right there. And it turns out the lady is actually the one who opened the shop. Kenta asks if she's making any sales, but she tells him business is totally dead because the spot sucks, and they've got zero luck today. Kenta told her he'd buy out the whole shop since the veggies looked fresh and the gear seemed super useful, and the lady was totally down for it. Kenta said she was the only person who didn't freak out at his familiars, so he really wanted to help her out. He kept saying he'd be totally down to buy every single thing she had. She said deal and told him it'd be 20 silver coins, thanking him for being so generous. The mom and her son were totally hyped because they managed to sell every single thing they had. The kid says he's starving. The lady points out it's already way past noon, and then he asks Kenta if his food is actually any good. Kent grinned and said it tasted super sweet, then offered the kid a bite. The kid started devouring the meal and kept shouting about how amazing it tasted. The lady gave Kenta a huge thanks for being cool enough to share his snacks with them. And right after that, Ken just took off. Then he rushed over to a nearby shop to grab a collar. The shopkeeper showed off the collar. Kent thought it looked awesome, and Nini was totally into it too. The shopkeeper snaps a rabbit collar onto Max, and Kent notices the thing even comes with a lid. The guy even showed him a cool perch where Falco could hang out. Kent was totally on board and thought everything looked awesome. The shopkeeper said the job was way harder than he thought and asked for 4 extra gold coins, so Ken thanked him for all the hard work. The guy made it super clear that he wasn't bargaining on the price. Kenta was still a bit suspicious and asked if the extra fee was a total scam. But after the guy promised it was legit, Kenta played it cool and thanked him for the amazing job. The shopkeeper got all choked up and told Kenta to just hit him up if he ever needs anything else. Ken asks if that saddle is actually going to fit on Max. The guy says a bbit should lock it down, but he's still questioning if the belt is actually going to work. Max just hoped the saddle wouldn't be too tight as they strapped it on, and when Kenta asked how he was doing, the guy promised it was totally secure and said the reins would hook right onto the collar. Once everything was locked in, Kenta said the fit was spot on. Max was shocked by how light it felt, and the guy told them it just needed one tiny tweak to be finished. Kenta was totally hyped and said it looked super cool. Max made sure it wasn't tight at all, and Kenta was totally hyped about how amazing it felt. Kenta headed out to grab some food and a cold beer, and man, it tasted absolutely amazing. Right then, Hector and his crew showed up, and he told Kenta that everyone in town was buzzing about him. He told Kenta there was a guild request he might actually like, and asked if he wanted the details. Hector says orchards in the 3 villages around Restum are being trashed, and since they found hoofprints at the scene, Kenta wonders if it's a monster hunting jaw. Hector pointed out the animals weren't just eating everything, they were only picking the good stuff, which meant humans were definitely behind it. He also thinks some crazy monster tamer or beastmaster might be behind this. Hector told Kenta the choice was totally up to him, but warned him the village was broke and the pay was trash, especially since fighting a beastmaster would be way too dangerous for such a small reward. Ken asks why Hector even took the job, and Hector explains that someone was in trouble and everyone else was too scared to help. But he didn't mind the work at all. Kenta was totally down with that. The old guy from the guild sent Kenta and Hector off, telling them he was totally counting on them. Can't this guy just keep his thoughts to himself for once? This was his first official guild quest, and he was super curious about what kind of crazy stuff they'd run into on the job. Hector pointed out the new saddle on Kentis's familiar, and noticed the beast was totally chill with it. Kenta told him he went to the leather shop on Craftsman Street, which totally shocked Hector since the owner is famous for being a total grouch. But Kenta just thought the old guy was actually pretty chill. Hector says the old man is a total pro, but he's famous for turning down new orders and only selling what's already in stock. Plus rumors are flying that he's about to retire for good. So maybe Kenta actually made the right call after all. He starts remembering exactly what the old man told him. After all that, they finally made it to History Village. That's where the village chief Brian met them and thanked them for showing up. Kent showed off his familiars too, and then Brian led the whole crew straight to the site. They said these monsters were snatching all the best crops right before they could even harvest them. It looks like whoever did this is a total pro when it comes to horses. Kent checked out the footprints and realized they looked like a horse's, but he was totally confused because they didn't match a human or even a normal wild horse. Shamble gets this weird feeling that something is totally wrong. He thought maybe a centaur was behind it, but he quickly brushed that idea off. Hector walks right up to Kenta and asks if he's actually blaming a centaur, and Kenta just says it's definitely possible. He was convinced horse-human hybrids were actually real, and Shuram backed him up, saying they live way up on mountain peaks and almost never come down to the world below. Kent asked Hector if that thing was really a centaur, wondering what kind of craziness was about to go down. Hector explains it's a legendary phantom race monster that nobody's ever actually seen, and if they bring it to the capital, it'll be a total game changer. So Kent starts thinking. Franz asked if Kenta was for real because no human can take on a centaur, and even the king's top soldiers would get totally wrecked by its insane strength. Suddenly, everyone felt a super weird vibe coming from far away, and when Sham asked if they could sense it, Kent totally agreed. Sham finally starts to figure out what's going on and tells Kenta to get out of the way. Kenta told the squad to head out because he really needed some time to himself. Hector points out that Kent's decision is just like something a person from the forest would do. The group realized Kenta's had everything under control, so he was gonna lead it right to him, and then head back to the village. Ken told them to warn the villagers to stay inside and promised he'd be back as soon as the coast was clear. As soon as the coast was clear, Kenta shouted at the centaur to quit hiding and finally show its face. The centaur was a total no-show, making Kenta wonder if it even understood what he said. Then Sham unleashes the first stage's second-year recognition along with the second mouth language. He told Kenta to give it a shot, so Kenta shouted to the centaur again, promising he wasn't looking for a fight. The centaur reveals himself and asks how he could possibly know that. Kenta was totally hyped to see a centaur chilling right there in his car. He asked why it was wandering so far away from its home. Once he realized what was happening, the guy in the middle started sobbing and stumbling around. She turned to Kenta and chewed him out for making the centaur cry, leaving him totally lost as he asked what he even did wrong. He actually apologizes to the centaur and asks him if there's anything he's in the mood to eat. The middle part is clamped shut just like a mouth. Kenta offered him a snack, and the centaur asked if it was fruit, but Kenta honestly didn't even know what he was giving him. They're totally soaking the fruit in all that power. He thanked Kenta and introduced himself as Barry Hennel, the youngest of the Chiron, then asked Kenta who he actually was. From his hiding spot, the centaur realized Kenta wasn't just some regular dude, and Kenta knew his magic was the reason why. Shamgal told the centaur that he'd finally be able to see him clearly now. The centaur was totally blown away to see Samuel, the literal god of their world, and they had to ask why he was there, and why he looked so tiny and cute. Sham asks what the heck happened to that centaur. The centaur explained that as the Earth's power started fading, his entire race began to fall apart. A bunch of people were shrinking and totally frozen just like him, and Shame asks if anyone has completely vanished yet. The centaur just shook his head and said it was bound to happen since he's so massive, and he actually left his village on purpose just so there'd be more food for everyone else. Samuel warns everyone that the centaur is totally overdoing it, and they're gonna need the most powerful mana possible just to stay alive. He explained how humans caught him on his journey and locked him in a cage to ship him to the capital. But he finally found a chance to break out and run. He burned through a ton of mana and barely limped into the village while he was literally on his last breath. Kenta finally realized why the centaur looked so strange, and the beast thanked him for the fruit that literally saved his life. Kenta blurted out that there was definitely something super weird about that centaurus form. This centaur is actually over 300 years old, and Shame explains that his kind had to burn their own mana to survive back when humans were struggling. If they didn't, they'd just shrivel up and disappear, and Kenta was totally blown away by the news. He was totally worried the centaur wouldn't make it, but the centaur said he'd be back to normal as long as he got enough mana. Shane says they need a ton of mana for a full day of recovery, and the more that centaur eats, the faster he's gonna heal. Kenta asked to see their stash, so Sakura opened up his storage and showed off all the fruit they had. Kenta told the centaur to just scarf down every single bit. Now that he was the Centaur 8, he asked Kenta how he even ended up teaming up with Samuel. Shamimal announces Kenta is the guy who's gonna save the world, and the centaur is totally blown away. Sham explains that Kenta is actually from a different world, and that he's the one who reincarnated him here. The centaur bowed low and admitted he'd be history if it wasn't for Kenta, thanking him for saving their entire world. But Kenta just played it cool and said, all Shamuel really wanted was for him to help the centaur find his way back home. Kent agreed and then turned to Nini to say something. It felt like a massive journey, but the centaur told him not to sweat it. Kenta asks if he's finally full, and the centaur thanks him, saying he's totally stuffed. Kenta asked the centaur if he knew the way back to his house, and the centaur told him he knew exactly where it was. She kept thinking about how Kenta was so sincere and serious, but also just totally adorable. Kent said he owed Samuel a favor and was already rushing over to help. The centaur asked if they were cool, so Kenta shook his hand and found out his name was Barry. When Ken finally gets back to the village, Brian asks if he's okay, and Ken tells him they made it back in one piece. Brian asks if that monster was actually a centaur, but Ken says it was a different kind of beast, and that they totally handled it. Kenta asked Brian if 50 gold coins would be enough to cover the damage and the rest of the fruit trees. Ryan said the money was enough to cover everything, so they should ship what they had and finally get some rest. Brian told everyone to stay the night so they'd be totally ready for the big harvest and shipment the next morning. Ken asked Hector if he was doing okay, and Hector told him he'd just report everything to the guild tomorrow. Kenta asks where he can get that tea, and Brian tells him the leaves are from Leaworth Village, one of the towns caught right in the middle of the drama. So he agreed to lead Ken straight to the spot. While Ken was pitching his tent outside, Hector apologized for snagging the guest room, but Ken just laughed it off and said he actually loved the cozy vibes out there. Hector was totally hyped about the storage skill and really wanted one for himself, while Kent just told him it makes traveling way easier. Hidden inside the text was a picture of apple juice and jam on bread that they shared together. France told Kenta they had to head back to the guild, and Kenta was totally down for it. Once he spilled the whole story, France and Hector were left totally blown away. Kenta asks if they should report this to the guild, and even though Franz knows it's a total mess, they decide it's better to just come clean and tell them since the whole mess had been a total struggle for them to handle. The next morning, the group finally made it back to the Adventurers Guild. They told the guild everything that happened, and the whole place was left in total shock. Kenta called out, telling Barry to finally show his face. And that's exactly when Barry finally showed up. These guys were totally losing it seeing a real centaur, and one of them even said he never thought he'd live to see this day. An old man gave Kento a big handshake to say thanks, and seeing that huge smile made Barry realize the whole trip was totally worth it. The other two rushed over to Barry, super hyped to shake his hand, and when he told them they could ask him anything, one of the girls immediately asked for his autograph. Kent tells the group that Chief Brian is waiting for him, so he's heading out and needs them to keep a close eye on Barry. Hector tracks down Brian and tells him it's time to hit Leaworth Village, letting Kenta know they're leaving and to call if anything goes down. While Kenta was hanging with Max, Brian asked where Nini went, and Kenta told him she's just out hunting and will be back any second. Brian was super hyped about how cool Kent's familiars looked and asked where he found them, so Kent told him they came from Shadowcut Mountain. Ryan was totally stunned and told Kenta he was the first person he'd ever met from that place, asking him what it was really like. Ken just shrugged it off like it was no big deal, and then Brian actually apologized. He told everyone they'd finally made it to Leaworth Village. While they were out grabbing gear, a lady thanked Kenta for saving the orchard and let him pick out his favorite top-tier green or black tea. Kent said he already got his reward, so he was going to buy a ton of stuff, and the lady thanked him for the big purchase. Then he brings up the third village, Hubble. Tenny had a ton of cool wood carvings, baskets, and dishes, and even though Kenta thought the chief was totally trolling him, he decided to check it out and just buy the whole stock. Kenta and Brian rolled into Albel Village and started checking out all the cool items. Kenta realized he'd seen these items before since he'd bought them from that family, and suddenly a guy asks if he's the one who bought a massive haul from the lorries. They thanked him for totally having their backs the whole time. Right then, Nay was hanging with Kenta while Max was out on the hunt. Out of nowhere, this cat pops up and starts staring Ninny down. They were totally losing it over how massive she was, wondering what they were even looking at. Kenta's jaw hit the floor when the cat actually started talking like a human. Suddenly, the cat actually speaks up and says hello to them. The guy just shooed it away, telling it he didn't have any food for it. Kenta was totally tripping, wondering if that cat actually just talked. He kept on grabbing more stuff just as the cat started heading out. Sham points out that something about this whole situation feels totally off. Kenta agreed that the cat looked super sketchy, and Shameless pointed out it definitely shouldn't be there. Kenta calls out to the cat, straight up asking if it can actually talk. The cat just told him straight up that she had no idea what he was even talking about. Kenta thought he was losing his mind, but the cat told him it was all just in his head. Kent was dead serious that the thing was actually talking. The cat got super curious and straight up asked if he could actually understand her. That's when Shamuel realized he was looking at a legendary beast called a Kate Sith. Kenta was totally stunned and asked if it was basically a centaur, and Shamuel told him he was spot on. He explained that these legendary monsters usually never show up in human towns, so it was clear that something big was starting to change. Kenta asked if the cat lived in the village, but when it said no, he immediately wanted to know if the little guy was getting enough to eat. The cat said she gets hungry sometimes, but since the village was super poor, she wasn't going to force them to feed her. Shamville sounded totally choked up as she called out for Kenta. He totally got the hint that Shamil wanted him to look after the cat. Ken tells them he's not about to say no, so he's totally down to help out. He turns to the cat and asks if she wants to join the crew, promising her a free meal if she tags along. She introduced herself as Talon and gave them a super friendly welcome. Max walked back in from his hunt and totally shocked Talon, while Ken pointed out that their little crew was finally growing. Shamil thought Kenti kept the magic steady, but these crazy new changes mean they have to watch him like a hawk. Now they're heading straight back to see Rustum. A little kid sprints over to Nini and Max, totally recognizing them as part of the Lorry family. He mentioned he just finished a guild job in Albel Village, and the other guy asked if he'd finally cleared up that whole orchard mess. Once Kent confirmed the news, they were all super hyped to hear it. Ken saw the kid munching on some bread and asked if he liked it, and the boy told him it was super sweet and delicious, but it sells out in the blink of an eye. While the kid and his mom headed out, he was stoked that the new stuff was selling so well, especially since Nolan bread had become a total smash hit. A bit later, Kentum whipped up an egg sandwich. He was super hyped to find some mayo to throw on top. Just as he was heading up the stairs to his place, the guildmaster suddenly called out to him. After thanking him for the hard work, the guildmaster said the guild would buy fruit from the village just to help Barry out. And get this, the fruits were stashed right in the warehouse where Barry was waiting. Kenta headed out to finally meet up with Barry. Barry noticed how much she'd grown and said Kenta was the reason for all of it. Ken tells Sakura to grab every single thing they can find. He pops open the map to find Barry's home, and Barry tells him it's way out in the mountains with an entrance that's super easy to see. He wasn't in any hurry, so he told Kenta to just focus on the trip, and decided to have some fun on the road now that he was finally free. Kenta's thinking about sticking to the original plan, and he knows Shuram is totally going to be on board with that. Ken tells them they're hitting up Bison first to get his sword made, then they're heading straight to Barry's. The road from the eastern capital to Bison looked like a total shortcut, but Shane warned them the east was way too dangerous and suggested the west route instead, which Kenta totally agreed with. They're gonna hit Chester, cross 2 rivers, and pass through Luworth and Wolves before finally reaching Bison. He told Barry it was gonna be a massive trip, but they should definitely hit up the towns along the way, and Barry was all in. Kenta asks Talon what she usually eats, and she tells him she's down for anything, from meat and fish to eggs and veggies. Kenta realized she eats just like anyone else, so he handed her some chicken, and Talon thought it looked totally delicious. Barry had no clue when the Kate Sith even showed up, but he still gave Talon a quick shout-out. Ken finished scarfing down his food and told everyone to grab their supplies before they headed out of Restum. He finally drifted off to sleep, wondering what kind of crazy adventure was waiting for them. The next morning rolls around. The squad reached the rocky wasteland where Kenta hyped them up for the hunt. Nini promised to give it her all, and Talon bulked up to show he was totally down for the fight. Kenta's jaw dropped when he saw that Talon could actually change his size right in front of him. Shamble explains that mythical beasts can change their size just like gem monsters, but they use a slightly different trick, making Kenta really curious about how all this magic actually works. He's just asking if that's what everyone actually calls it around there. He was super hyped to finally try it out for himself. Sham says Kenta isn't ready for that move yet, so Kenta asks if Shamiel has ever actually pulled it off himself. Sham tells him to be smart with it and not go overboard, and Kenta is so hyped he just agrees. Sham flashed 3 cards in front of him and told him to take his pick. Once Kent picks his card, Shane tells him to put his hands out, palms forward, and Kent does exactly what he's told. Mo moves his pawns in on Kentis and tells him to grab Ice Affinity, ordering him to freeze on command and pay close attention. They told Shami to give it a shot, and the second he said the words out loud, suddenly, a perfect-looking rock just popped right into his hand, and man, it was a total rush. Shamiel then told him to just say the word shatter. The moment he said the word, that rock just shattered into tiny pieces. Samuel told him he had to go save Malt. Suddenly, the rock started melting right in Kentis's hands. Kent is still standing, and it's all thanks to Samuel. Shame explains that the ice is rock solid and would seriously wreck someone if it got thrown. To show them how it's done, he yells "Rock Ice" and hurls a frozen rock right at a nearby monster. It slammed down and totally wrecked everything it hit. Sham tells him he better be super careful with this mission. Kento told them to get moving and try to catch as much as possible. He whipped up some ice rocks and teamed up with his familiars to start hunting down monsters for their gems. His familiars were totally freaking out, telling him to move it because they were running super late. He said his heart was totally done, but he still whipped out his hammer for one more round. So they kept right on going, staying on the hunt for those gems. He told them he's grabbing potions today, so they can finally go wild and give it everything they've got. After spending some time out on the hunt, they headed straight to the shop of the guy who makes the collars for his familiars. The second the guy spotted him, he immediately asked what he was doing there. Kent told them he was actually just looking for a collar for the cat. Enta told Talon to pick her favorite color. Actually, let's make it even simpler. The guy realized Kenta was back on the hunt and knew more adventurers. He told the guy he was heading straight to Basin to forge a sword out of that horn. The guy was totally stunned to hear about the horn and begged Ken to show it to him. Kent showed it off, and the guy immediately knew it was a Hercules beetle horn. Ken asked if this thing was actually worth a fortune. The guy said he's from Basin and runs a super popular shop right on Main Street. But things went south fast, and he ended up drowning in a mountain of debt. Luckily, a friend had given him a super rare Hercules beetle horn. But that night it got stolen, and since he couldn't pay back what he owed, he lost his shop and his home. He could have saved himself by stopping the robbery, But instead, he tried to fix his money problems by stealing everything his friend had. He felt like a total idiot for avoiding his friend, but back in Bison, his buddy just let it go and forgave him. The guy thanked Kenta for finally bringing peace to the horn. Ken just tells him to drop it and forget about it. The guy finally introduces himself as Fort and says his buddy's name is Fyanth. He wished Ken a safe trip as he headed out on his journey. Kent told Fort he was hyped they were finally friends and gave him a solid handshake. Kenta headed out, and Fort got right back to his grind. Shamel had to remind himself that he was the literal god who created everything. Their whole job was to build, guard, and take care of every single world in the multiverse. He just finished making this epic world full of water and nature where everything lived together in peace, and it was his most prized creation. But those weak energy lines finally snapped, and the whole place started falling apart. He tried every trick in the book to save it, but nothing worked. Since he was totally out of options, he couldn't find anyone before the clock hit 0, and the whole place just kept crashing down around him. He finally summoned Kenta, the only guy who can actually save the entire world. The second Kent showed up, this super warm energy filled the air and made everyone feel totally safe. Samuel felt like he owed Kenta big time and was dying to return the favor. The next morning rolls around. Kenta's familiars were the ones who finally snapped him awake. He went right down the line and greeted every single one of them. He saw how much Barry had grown up, and Barry thanked him for always having his back. He finished splashing some water on his face. Ken tells his familiars to jump in and do the exact same thing. And honestly, they were having a total blast with it. Next, Kenta got busy whipping up some breakfast. He said he was going to fry up those veggies using the olive oil he'd found the other day. Make it more exciting. He started whipping up some fresh panko breadcrumbs for the tonkatsu. Final check on rules. No prefixes. He took a bite and was totally shocked by how good it tasted, wondering if it was actually way lighter than he first thought. He even whipped up some fried chicken, and it turned out just as amazing. Secure got everything packed away while it was still fresh, and Ken definitely had to thank her for the help. He asked Shamal if he wanted to grab a bite, but Shamal totally turned him down. Instead, they asked if they were even going hunting today, leaving Kent totally torn since he still had to get ready for his big trip. Shame explains that there are tons of new gem monsters to hunt, like giant brown rats and those deadly brown mantises. Then there were those brown grasshoppers that were a total nightmare to deal with, and Kenta was super curious about how they could suddenly turn into a massive swarm. He decided they'd go hunting today, prep for the trip tomorrow, and finally set off the day after that. Barry told everyone he'd be hanging out at the guild. Kenta got his familiars all set and shouted that it was finally time to go hunting. They finally made it to the spot they were looking for. Kent spotted a massive swarm of mantises that looked totally terrifying. Shamble says if these guys are just a distraction, Kenta can totally handle it, so they should just stay back for now. The squad jumped into the fight with the mantises while Kent hung back to count exactly how many they were dealing with. Out of nowhere, the variant Nante behind him just vanished. Nini charges in to keep Kenta safe, but he reacts in a flash and just slashes it right down. He checked it out and found a massive glowing gem. It looked like some kind of super hard material or maybe a staff, but man, it was actually really beautiful. Max and Nini were totally stunned when he took that monster out like it was nothing. Shimo noticed Kenta's massive level up, while Max and Nini were totally hyped that he actually soloed a variant all by himself. Shane Mullen shouted that those brown grasshoppers were history after that win, so he told everyone to get moving and keep the journey going. They got right back on the move and kept pushing forward. Ken said Shamal would find where the grasshoppers were hiding, but it was getting late and you started to wonder if you were even on the right track, which Max totally agreed with. And right then, Shamwell popped out of nowhere. He screams that it's a total emergency and they need to run even faster. Max and Nini didn't waste a second and started sprinting. Kenta was left totally confused, but Sham explains that a massive wave of monsters had swarmed in and things were looking really bad. Kenta asked if Shamul knew this massive outbreak was coming, but Shamul admitted the numbers were way higher than he expected, warning that these monsters would wipe out all life and crush the people. Kenton tried to size things up, but Shamul insisted on going solo, so Kenton just asked if there was any way they could back him up. Sham's gonna tell them straight up that it was totally impossible. Kenta then asked if there was anything else he could do to help out. If he takes over Kent's body, he's going to be stuck with that shame forever. He explains that using a medium is what makes fighting way easier for him. Kenta froze up, wondering if Samuel could actually jump inside his body. He realized they were running out of time, so he finally let Shamel use it. Samuel got super emotional seeing Kent step up, saying that his friend has literally never said no to him before. Kent just flashed a grin and told them it's because he's a nice guy. Shame promises he's gonna keep Kenta alive, then he finally backs away from Max and Nini. He tells them to just stay put, figuring they'll be totally safe right there. He dove straight into Kenta's body, leaving Kenta totally shocked as his own limbs started moving on their own. Shamgol's voice rings in Kenta's head as he worries if those grasshoppers are still a threat. But Shamgol explains the ley lines are finally steady, even though their energy is. When the grasshoppers swarmed, they mutated into something way more aggressive. All that extra water and greenery just made the whole situation a total nightmare. Shamul really meant to deal with them way sooner. They were multiplying way too fast, and he totally didn't expect things to get this crazy. He knew things were about to get super dangerous and scary, so he told Kenta to just keep his eyes shut. Kenta hesitates and asks if he should look away, and Sham totally agrees with him. Kent spoke up and told them he was actually just trying to protect this place. He might be a total coward, but he's actually showing some guts, so let him help carry this weight while Shamil thanks him for stepping up. He told them to watch this go down together, and asked them not to be scared of him once it was all over. Ken asked if it was way too late for that, but Shameless just smirked and told him he had to make a promise. Kent was totally down for it. Add it to the list, 'cause we're throwing a massive party the second they get back. Shem nodded and admitted that even though his rank kept him at a distance, he'd been thinking that food looked delicious for a long time. Ken just laughed and said he was gonna whip something up for them. All right, let's just get this over with real quick. Suddenly, a giant swarm of grasshoppers headed straight for them, and there were so many of these massive bugs it was insane. Ken points out how massive they are and that there's seriously a ton of them. Shamble blasts everyone back with his magic, creating a massive shield to keep that swarm away. Kent and Marvel finally arrive at the scene and can't believe what they're looking at. He realizes the swarm is even devouring the animals now. Shamble moves like a total blur, slicing through them all without even breaking a sweat. He's just shredding through those monsters with every single swing of his blade. Shemalt yelled that he wasn't finished just yet. He just flicks his wrist and torches the rest of those grasshoppers with fire. Kenta was totally stunned by Shanel's insane power, but Shamul didn't slow down, launching a meteor attack to wipe out even more of them. Kent thinks they should just keep blasting away to make things easy, but Sham shuts him down, warning that if they don't stop shooting, the whole area where the meteors land will be totally wiped out. It takes forever to heal back up, so you really shouldn't do it unless things get super desperate. Sham doesn't stop and just keeps slicing right through the whole swarm with his blade. Fire trailed off the blade as it ripped through the air, and while Kenta was totally mesmerized, Sham actually apologized because he was worried the heat would wreck the sword. A grasshopper launches itself straight at Shanul. It slams right into his arm, and man, he's definitely feeling that one. Sham immediately says sorry for wrecking Kent's body. He uses his powers to patch that injury right up. Kenta watched the battle go down and wondered if the grasshoppers were finally starting to thin out. Shamble launched back into the sky, gliding through the air once again. He roasts the rest of the monsters with his flares and then goes right back to slashing them up. He kept swinging like crazy, and his clothes were getting ripped to shreds as the fight dragged on. Finally, Sham just drops to the dirt, totally wiped out from that long battle. Kenta thinks back to the nightmare car crash that took his parents' lives when he was just a teenager. His uncle ended up taking him in, and Kenta used his inheritance money to pay for school. He moved to the village, scored a job, and finally learned how to stand on his own 2 feet. He spent every single day hauling heavy gear and worked his tail off without ever stopping. His whole day was just boring meetings all morning and hitting up clients all afternoon. And then he finally heads back home to crash for the night. He was just chilling in bed one night when Nini suddenly showed up. Morning rolls around and Kentao finally wakes up, knowing he's got to get moving. But the alarm never went off, so he just decided to stay in bed and sleep a little longer. That's when he finally opened his eyes. He woke up totally beat up and realized the whole thing was just a crazy dream. Suddenly he hears some super familiar voices calling out his name. Everyone was losing their minds because he was finally back. Kenta finally woke up and remembered getting absolutely wrecked by a swarm of locusts, just as Shanival handed him a drink. And it actually tasted super sweet. And get this, he literally can't drink anything at all. He quickly figured out that he could actually talk again, and give them a huge thank you for helping out. He saw that Max and Nini were both getting really choked up. He said he was sorry, and Sham told him to keep drinking so he'd finally have the energy to get moving again. He rushed back to give them a huge thank you one more time. Samuel walks right up to Kenta. She leaned in and softly told him that he was finally broken. Kenta finally got his hand moving, and the second he touched Samuel, he realized just how crazy soft that tail actually was. Shamuel warned him to watch out because that spot was super sensitive and he shouldn't go overboard. Shamuel was super grateful and gave Kenta a massive thank you for saving him twice. Kent tried to act humble by saying he just screamed, but Shamuel joked that he was actually way too loud. Kenta started wondering exactly how long he'd been lying there on the ground. Samuel says it's been a day and a half, and Kenta is totally losing his mind. Shamil explained that he actually stashed the whole wasteland in a pocket dimension and swapped it out for a meadow. Kenta was totally blown away and couldn't believe he was in the same spot because it looked so insane. Shamgal promised him that this total wasteland would actually heal up, even if it took forever. Kenta agreed and thanked Samuel for all the help, while Shame was just totally relieved that Kenta was actually safe. While Max and Nini showered him with licks, Kent apologized for scaring them and gave them a massive thank you. He said they needed to head back so he could rest up, especially since Barry and the guild were already waiting for them. Samuel hooked Ken up with some brand new armor and handed him his sword. Kent asked Sakura to help him wash up, and then he quickly swapped into his fresh new clothes. Shamble pointed out the armor was way tougher now, while Kent noticed his clothes had changed a little bit too. Finally, he could grab his sword with both hands. He took a real close look at his blade, but man, it was still totally busted. Shame explains that the locust jums and a ton of variants were backing them up, so Kenta asks exactly how many they're dealing with. Shami spills the numbers, showing Aqua has 49 million while Sakura is ahead with 57 million, and 1 out of every 10 is actually a special variant. Kenta was totally shocked and asked if carrying all those gems would be a huge mess, but Shamu promised him they were totally safe. He warns them that if these monsters keep multiplying like a plague of bugs, it's going to be a total nightmare to deal with. Kenta was totally cool with keeping the loot and told them to just hide it, but Shamuel was shocked he wasn't planning to trade it for cash right away. Ken warns them that the whole guild will totally fall apart if they actually do it. He figured it was time to head back because he was totally starving. He shouted over to Max and Nini, asking if the food was finally ready. They apologized for totally blanking on it, so Kent told them to just go grab the food while he hung back and waited. But his familiars are already hyped to get the cooking started. Ken just pulls a table and chair straight out of Sakura. And he's even got a backup set ready to go. And he's even got a sandwich made with kettle bread. He wasted no time and started stuffing his face. He started going on about how awesome it was. Shen asks if it was really that good. Kenton gave a quick nod and held some out for Shanmul. He said he'd treat Shamil like he promised, and it turns out Shamil was really craving some fried chicken. Kent even joked that Samuel looked like he was totally craving it. Shem apologizes to Kenta and explains that he never meant to get things twisted. He just wanted Kenta to finally be happy. Kenta finally realized that Shamu had actually been stressing over this the whole time. He admitted that he used to hate school so much that even just getting out of bed in the morning felt like a total drag. But honestly, he was having a total blast right now. Kenton knew his old life was actually pretty great, but he had zero interest in going back. Shamil told him that if Kenta ever wanted that, it was because his soul was literally craving it. Ken told them straight up that his life was actually pretty awesome right now. He was honestly just hyped that Samuel had brought him to this spot. He's living his absolute best second life, chilling with all his favorite pets. They actually made it and felt like the luckiest people alive. He even offered Chingles a bite of his food. Shim says thanks and immediately dives in for a big bite. Ken looks back and asks if that was actually good. Samuel just nodded and told them they were totally right. So they finally head back to the guild. Kenta asks the old man how many gems he needs, and the old guy tells him he'll take every single one Kenta can find. Kenta pointed out that Michael's guild was totally broke and asked if they'd buy the loot too, and the old man confirmed they definitely would. Kenta asked if 10 regular ones and the gems from the brown grasshopper would be enough. Once they finished talking, the old man asked if they were still in trouble, but he told him that at least all those swarming grasshoppers were officially history. The old guy warned that this could turn into a long, brutal war with a massive body count. He said earthquakes were popping up everywhere, but luckily nothing was wrecked, and he was just super glad that Kenta was safe. The old guy even said he really hoped to meet the rest of the team one day because it sounded like a total blast. The old man asked how many gems Kenta had snagged, but Kenta just told him it was a total secret. He couldn't believe they trusted him so fast, and he felt like everything he said sounded super weird. The old man swore that he'd been telling the truth the whole time. But the real question was if Kenta was actually going to lead the place, and he said yeah, because his big dream is to travel the whole world. The old man grumbled about his dad trapping him in the middle of nowhere and asked Kenta to sign up at every guild they find, leaving Kenta totally confused about what that even meant. The old man found a guild on the map and planned to sign up just like the old days. But he also wanted to link all the guilds together to trade gems, help the locals, and spread his name around so they could all have each other's backs. Kenta saw a chance to score a sweet discount on a room while helping out the town and the guild, so he jumped right on it. Kent finally steps outside. Barry was super hyped about Kenta's hard work, and said he would have joined him way sooner if he could, while Kenta apologized for leaving him hanging for days. Barry says he stayed back at the guild since Sham was going to report to him there first. Kenta asks how things went, but Shamuel keeps it a total secret, so Kenta just shrugs and says the world is full of mysteries anyway. The next morning, Kenta stocked up on a massive haul of food and coffee, traded in his gems, and was finally ready to hit the road. The old man started walking right up to him. He whispered that it was finally time to say goodbye. He reached out for a fist bump to wish Kenta luck and a strong bond, and Kenta tapped him right back. Kenta told Barry to stay safe and then took off toward Chester. Everyone in Reston was super nice, and he honestly had a total blast being there. He was super curious to see what kind of town and people were waiting for him. Out of nowhere, a massive swarm of salamanders starts chasing him down. He couldn't believe he went from chilling by the water to running for his life. But Shuram explains it was all because of the massive breath from those giant brown salamanders. Right then, Max shows up and tells Ken to hop on. Shamil yelled for Kenta to blast the salamander's weak spot with ice while they made a run for it, and Kenta was totally down for the plan. But suddenly, a massive elemental blast came flying straight at him from the front. He was too slow to react, but out of nowhere the attack was sliced right out of the air. And just like that, it transforms into a massive glowing jewel. Some random guy walked up and asked Kenta if he was doing okay. Ken gave him a huge thanks for having his back. Shamuel instantly recognized Hasfer, who was totally shocked and asked how he ended up in such a cute form. Kenta wondered if Hasfer and Shamuel were actually buddies, but then Shamuel totally hyped him up by introducing Kenta as the world's legendary savior. She finally realized Kenta was from a whole different world and made sure to thank him. As Hastur introduced himself, Kenta started wondering if this guy was actually a literal god. Shameless wondered if Hasfer was a straight-up god of war, while Kent couldn't stop thinking about a god actually living in a human body. Shame explains that his crew helped him build that world, and Hasfer was actually one of the guardians. Kenta's feeling a lot better now, but he asks why they didn't just get the brown pauper to help, and Shane just says the guy totally ghosted them. Hashtray asked the duo if they'd finally finished off those grasshoppers. Shamil said it's been a total nightmare, but Hashtra called him out for ditching his class when the bad omens appeared, and Shamil just made the excuse that he was way too busy. Shame points out that Hasfer was actually super strong, and since he's a human just like Kenta, he would have made a perfect vessel. Then Hasher just made that massive gem vanish into thin air. Kenta's jaw drops as Jamie reveals that Hasfer was actually using it this whole time. Kenta wondered if this was some kind of storage unit, and if Hastur had packed it with gear, especially since he usually relies on Aqua and Sakura to handle that stuff. He checked out Kentus's familiars and was seriously impressed, especially since he even had a cat sith and a centaur on his side. Hasfer was waving his hands over Max and Nini, while Kent made sure to mention they were actually with him. Hastur asked Kenta if he was actually training magical beasts in that spot. Even though Kenta was a total rookie, he was already seeing things way above his level, and after hearing about the terrifying monsters on Shadowcut Mountain, he wanted absolutely nothing to do with that place. Hasfer asked if Kenta was totally clueless and told Samuel to start thinking ahead, warning that being sloppy would definitely get them caught. Sham admits it was a struggle, but he's got a solid plan and is taking things slow since they're still just getting started. Kenta thanked Shamuel and said he finally learned his lesson about being reckless, which made Hester crack up while Shamuel felt totally guilty, wondering how he'd messed the kid up. Hester asked where they were going next, and Ken told him they were aiming for Bison, but for now, they were still stuck in Chester. Hasfer knew Kenta was totally clueless about this world, so he offered to tag along and watch his back. He promised to spill every secret he had, and Kenta was so hyped that he immediately said he was in. It was a total relief to have Hasfer's backup, and honestly, Shenwol Wundry was still the same big softy he remembered. He saw Kenta was getting way stronger too, but Kenta just said he'd take help from anyone because they can't survive this alone. Hasfer suggests heading to the Shadowcut Mountains, and a totally shocked Kanto asks him why. Hasfer told Kenta to hop on his familiar while he went to find his own ride in the forest, since they really needed to see what those Shadowcut Mountains were actually like. Kentest is totally freaked out and refuses to go any closer, but Hasfer keeps pushing him, saying it's a huge chance to meet the forest sea people, and he just laughs while Kentest stays absolutely terrified. As the sun started to set, they realized the mountain was still 2 days away, so they decided to stop and set up camp for the night. Kenta sets up the tent and thinks it'll be a blast to sleep there with his familiars. Then he whips out a table and chairs to start cooking, asking Task if he's actually down to eat human food. Hashtag was just glad Kenta's food was easy to carry around, and Shangle jumped in to say that everything Kenta cooks is always super tasty. Kent decided to grill up some meat and go all out with a massive feast. He dusted the meat with a quick sprinkle of spices and tossed it straight onto the fire. He figured more heat would do the trick, so Hashtag told him to use the gem to fuel the fire. Kenta was totally confused about the gem until he learned that the type of stone you pick actually changes how crazy the fire gets. Kenta admits he's been tossing the smaller gems in this whole time. Hasfer hands him a gem and tells him to use it, explaining it's from a brown rock toad and packs some serious, long-lasting firepower. But Kenta quickly realizes the gem won.
Hasfer whipped out a gem cutter.
He tells Kenta to drop the gem inside, explaining that the cutter is about to smash it into 8 tiny pieces. They just had to cover it up and press down hard. The gem shattered into tiny pieces, and honestly, it was a super clean break. He grabbed a piece and tossed it into the hole to start a fire, saying it was going to get super hot. Most people would have to hit up the guild or use special gear to split gems, so having their own cutter was a total game changer, and Kent finally let out a massive sigh of relief. He decided to whip up some bread soup, but Hasfer told him he was already stashing the cooked meals straight into his storage. Kenta takes that fatty meat sauce and pours it all over the steak and bread. He took a bite and straight up said it tasted amazing. When they told Kenta he could be a pro chef, he just played it cool and said they were giving him way too much credit. Ken reaches out and offers some of the food to Shamil. Samuel stuffed his face and admitted the food was so good he was actually falling for it. They kept moving forward and made sure Kenta didn't forget about those gem monsters. He noticed some strange colors in the forest that Kenta couldn't see, so he asked Shamu about Kenta's appraisal skill, and found out it was only at level 1. Hashtag explains that normal humans can usually only see up to the 2nd level. Samuel just unlocked the 2nd level of Kent's appraisal skill. Suddenly, Kenta could see every single color clearly. He looked up at the sky, wondering if that thing was actually just a bird. This black mosquito water only shows up at night, and since it's a total mess at flying, they're just waiting for it to fall. Suddenly, claws lunged at them, and mid-fight, Hasfer warned Kenta that the poison would knock him out cold. He said the poison would knock him out for 10 days straight, and that this monster is called the Nightmare, a total curse for adventurers that usually ends up getting eaten by other beasts. Just as they finished the fight, the rain started pouring down, and you know what that means. Gem monsters always show up when it's raining. They reached a pond and found out it usually gives off a scent, but it turns into a muddy mess as soon as it starts raining.
Out of nowhere, a fish bursts right out of the water.
They snagged the fish and realized it was a brown murder fish, meaning they could start reeling them in right away. Kenta jumped in and started fishing too, and he was using lures. The place looked like a total blast, and he was super hyped to fish there as much as he wanted. As soon as the rain stopped, Hasfer told him they had to get back to the sand immediately, warning Kenta that the fish would fall into a coma if they didn't. But he warned Kenta that the sand was actually a bottomless pit, telling him to watch his step because if he got stuck, he'd be trapped, and any rain would make him sink and die, which totally freaked Kenta out. Hasa tosses a small stone to show everyone just how fast the ground is about to cave in. He warned Kenta to stay sharp around the sandy spots by the pond, reminding him to treat every moment like a wild adventure. Just like that, Hasfer told everyone it was time to head out for the Shadowcut Mountains. Kenta was still shaking and refused to go because he just wanted to chill and have fun, but Shamil just called him a total stubborn brat. As they pushed through the massive forest, Kenton noticed the endless trees and pointed out that these plants looked nothing like the ones from the outside world. Hasfer started prepping the rope to catch the beast, telling Kenta to lay out the meat and get the trap ready for that hound. They ducked behind the bushes and stayed super quiet, just waiting. They had to figure out how to handle that meat, and they had to do it fast.
He's got to yank the rope back to tangle up its legs and trip it.
He scrambled onto the monster and yelled for Kenta to smack its nose with his sword sheath. Then he whacked the hound right on the nose, exactly like he was told. He reached out, touched the creature, and straight up asked if it wanted to join their squad.
They actually did it. The hound is finally tamed and under control.
Kent asked Shamul if he could hand off his familiar to someone else, and she said that as long as the master was cool with it, Deco could make the swap happen. Ken asked what the hound's name was, and Hashtag decided to name the beast Sirius.
Ken calls out to Sirius and points right at Hasfer, telling him that Hasfer is his new master now.
Hasfer introduced himself to the newly tamed hound, and Sirius told him it was cool to meet him. Sham explains that Sirius is a super rare variant. Kenta thinks that's totally awesome, and Hashtra gives Kenta a quick thanks for all his help. While they're traveling, Kenta points out that Sirius needs a saddle, but Hasfer lets him know there's a gem monster lurking nearby. Ken wondered if he was talking about the caterpillar, but the guy shut that idea down immediately. As they kept moving forward, they suddenly spotted a tree starting to shift. Hashtray explains it's a turtle tree, which is basically just a turtle with a tree growing right out of its back. Kenta's jaw dropped when he realized they were actually standing on a giant turtle shell. And Hashtra explained that since they were basically bait in the forest, the plan was to slice off the top part where all the nutrients were stored. Turns out that thing wasn't even a tree. It was actually a total parasite. That's exactly why it was so easy to just slice right through it. He chopped one of them down and scored a shiny gem. They just kept on slicing through everything. Out of nowhere, a whip-like tentacle shoots out and snatches Kent's leg. He was totally confused, wondering where that thing even came from. And he finally realized just how dangerous this really was. He whipped his knife out, ready to throw down. He was struggling big time just to slice through that creepy tendril.
He finally managed to break free. His summons charged right in to back him up.
Kenta scrambles to catch up, absolutely terrified for his life. He realized that whip actually came from the tree and figured it had to be some kind of crazy variant.
He slices right through the tendril and scores another gem.
He told Kenta he was lucky the tree didn't try to eat him, but Kenta just snapped back that trees don't eat people. But it wasn't just a tree, it looked like a caterpillar had taken a massive bite out of it. He pointed out a black killworm on the tree, explaining that these little guys are the only reason the turtle trees survived. Kenta was totally obsessed with how the tree used itself as bait, and while he was thinking about how the monsters and plants were linked, Hasfer told him to grab a piece of that massive gem as a reward for surviving. Hasfer shouts that it's time to hunt for more gems, so Kenta recruits Aqua and Sakura for backup before turning back to face Hasfer. He asks how he handled the gems, wondering if Hasfer couldn't use them all, or if he was just trying to keep some for himself. Hashtag turned it down, saying he already had way more than enough. Then he told Kenta he better make sure to grab every single gem. They'd just dropped them off near the ley lines so they could finally be brought back to life. Kenta figured Shamil was also hunting for those grasshopper gems, so Hasfer told him to stop being wasteful, and either use them or sell them for some quick cash. Right then, Aqua and Sakura showed back up to say they were finally done, and Ken made sure to thank them for all the help. Hashtray mentioned how super useful the slimes were, and Kenta pointed out they're even great for keeping themselves clean. Ninny snagged a slime and hauled it right back. Kent finally got his hands on it and decided to hand it right over to Hasfer. Shamuel even hooked the slime up with storage and purification skills. Then they named it Mist, and gave it a super warm welcome. With that out of the way, they got right back on the road. Kenta points out that the trail is getting way wider, which means they're finally closing in on the tree folk village. Ken stared right at the head. He pointed out how totally chill and quiet the whole place felt. Hasfer ran into an old guy on the trail, and after they said their hellos, they both realized it's been forever since they last saw each other. The old man checked Kenta out like he was some mystery guest, but Kenta was totally shocked to see the guy had dog ears, and the girl next to him had cat ears. He finally realized they'd made it to the Beastman village, and an old man walked right up to Kenta to introduce himself. The old guy said he knew the world was falling apart, and he'd already given up hope. He thanked Kenta for saving their entire world, but then he suddenly apologized, leaving Kenta totally confused about why the old guy was even saying sorry. Shame explains how Kent's soul was used to save the entire world, and now they finally get what really went down. Kenta told them to chill since that was all in the past, and he didn't even realize what was going down back then. He also mentioned he'd been traveling the whole world and checking out all kinds of cool new spots. The old man leads Kenta and his familiars to their room, and Kenta is totally shocked by how massive the place is. He scanned the area to see what was going on. He was totally blown away and wondered if it was actually handmade, because weaving fabric that massive seems almost impossible. Suddenly, this cat-eared girl pops up and starts asking questions. Kenta stood right there with the beasts, looking totally blown away by what he saw. Kenta broke down Shamuel's powers and how Hasfer helped him take down that hound, mentioning he's even training with them now, and the girl was totally hyped because they asked if he was a sage too, but Kenta just shook his head and told them he was actually just a beast tamer. The girl says her name is Lute, and Kent just smiles back with a friendly nod. Kenta told Hasfer to take the bed, but Hasfer tried to give it back, so Kenta just laughed and said the fluffiest friends always get the best spots. Lute was still totally blown away and said it was straight up amazing. She even asked if she could reach out and touch her new friends. Kenta thought the whole thing was funny and gave them the green light. The old man showed up and warned them that the sun was setting fast. It's way too dangerous out there until the sun comes up, so he tells everyone to stay inside and wait for morning. Kenta was totally lost, but Hashtag explained it was just a Sea of Trees tradition and promised they'd be way safer if they stayed inside. Lute was super worried about getting locked out, so Kenta quickly said he was sorry. Lute asked if she could crash with them for the night, and Kenta said sure, but he really wanted to know why staying inside after dark was such a big deal. She explained that once the sun sets, the forest totally changes, because they're the people of light, and the night belongs to the creatures of darkness. If they even stepped outside, those shadow monsters would totally devour them. The night was way too dangerous for anyone to survive, so she told them they had to stay inside. Kenta thought these dark. Lute nodded, admitting she'd never seen them herself, but the scariest was the Dark Eater, a bear-like monster that drags you into the shadows forever. What she said gave Kenti the major chills, and she just cracked up at his reaction. Lute describes how those creepy black clouds were swallowing everything from behind, making the vibe super dark, but Kenta tells him to shut up until Hasfer promises they're totally safe as long as they stay inside. Ken figured he'd waited long enough and it was finally time to grab some food. He pulled out some crispy fried chicken for dinner, along with fresh veggie soup and some fruit for dessert. Lute was super hyped and asked if he used some clone trick to make all that food, but Kent just told him he'd been keeping it fresh in his storage. She asked Lute for a bite, took a huge bite, and couldn't believe how good it tasted. He handed some over to Talon so he could grab a bite. Lute told Talon he was seriously lucky for getting to eat the same exact food as Kenta. Once dinner was over, Hasfer broke out the drinks, and Kenta realized he'd totally forgotten to buy any earlier after that long walk. Hasfer just laughed and told him to relax because he had plenty of booze for everyone to enjoy. Kenta decided it was time to hit the hay, but when he walked into the room, he saw Lute was already fast asleep with the nanny. Kent finally hits the bed and gets cozy right next to Nini and Max, wishing them both a sweet good night. Luke suddenly snaps awake and totally loses it when she sees Kenta sleeping right next to her. He told her it was totally fine and said that Nini and Max's fluffy fur was the best thing ever. Luke crawled under the covers to get some sleep while Kenta wished her a good night. He drifted off to sleep, thinking about how totally cozy and chill the whole day had been. He got this weird feeling that someone just walked right past the window outside, but weirdly enough, everything stays totally normal. The next morning rolls around and Kenta finally opens his eyes. They find Lute, but he's looking seriously sick. It's probably because he fell asleep with his hand right on her while she was totally out. She jumped to her feet and took charge the second the sun came up, while Ken tried to ask her what they were doing for dinner. Lute just gave a quick bow to say thanks for the food and then bolted right out of there. Kenta watches her walk away, lets out a big stretch, and thinks to himself that it's actually a pretty sweet morning. And the whole night went by without a single weird thing happening. Hasfer snapped awake and wondered if Kenta finally caught on, but Kenta just asked him what he was talking about. Hasfer laughs right in Samuel's face and tells him he's already won, leaving Samuel totally shook. Barry then asked Kintat if he had any clue why Lute wanted to sleep inside last night. Kenta wondered if she actually wanted to be buried on that cliff, but he quickly shook the thought away, telling him straight up that she'd totally fallen for him. Kenta's jaw dropped as he wondered if Lute was a guy, but when Barry told him she was actually a girl, he completely lost it. Hasfer looked at Kenta and asked if he seriously had no idea about that. Kenta buried his face in his hands, shouting that this had to be some kind of prank. Hasfer was supposed to bounce after just one night but started thinking about staying longer, though Kent shut that down fast and insisted they leave right now. Hashtag demanded to know why he was dodging her question, but Kenta just shut her down, telling her she's nothing but a little kid. Bee people grow up super fast, and since Lute is basically an adult, everything's cool as long as they both say yes. Kenta was totally stunned and kept denying everything, saying it was way too fast since he knows nothing about love, while Samuel and Hasfer just laughed their heads off at him. Just as they were heading out, the old man told them to grab some forced fire liquor as a souvenir. Kenta thanked him, and the old man wished them luck on their big journey.
And just like that, the Lute finally showed up.
She yells out for Kenta, telling him she's gonna grow up super fast. Looks like Kenta agreed needs to go pay her another visit. He waved goodbye, saying he was super hyped for it and hoped he'd stay safe. They head back to the training area to finally get down to business. Ken mentioned he wanted that same saddle for the little one, and they thanked him for it. Fort was totally shocked that those sample beer statues were selling like crazy, so he promised to fix the belt and told them to swing by tomorrow to grab it, and Kent was totally down with that as. Once they finally caught their breath, Sham totally loves the drink and keeps talking about how amazing it tastes. Kenta asks if Shamiel can even drink that, but Hasfor explains it's totally fine since this body is just a temporary form anyway. He also said Lesson has bars made from massive familiars, and the stew there is absolute fire. Kent took a bite and said the food was amazing, but right then, some guy walked over to get a good look at Sirius. He's finally asking who this mysterious guy is. He asked what was up with the familiar and called them the legendary Beastmaster, totally hyping up their insane research on taming. Then he straight up asked how much cash he'd have to drop for Sirius. Kenta was totally blown away by the offer. He told him straight up that he wasn't selling, but the guy wouldn't take no for an answer, and said he'd pay whatever it takes. He just asked the same thing again, making sure he heard him. Hasfer shut them down again, making it clear he wasn't selling a single thing. The guy looked straight at the Kentis hawk and asked how much it cost. Hasfer was getting seriously annoyed and snapped at the guy, asking if he missed the part where they said nothing was for sale. Totally bummed out, the guy said he was heading home, but he left his card and told them to hit him up if they changed their minds. Everyone was left scratching their heads, wondering what he was even talking about. He totally ignored them, and Hashtray even said that turning him down was definitely the right move. Kent was totally down for it because those people were his family. Hassler took one look at the card and knew right away that the Yussel Trading Company was behind this. Ken asks about this famous company and learns they're a massive old-school trading group that's super well known for dealing with the rich. They were actually caught up in the shady business of selling slaves and familiars. Kent wondered if slavery was still a thing in this world, and Shamil confirmed that it totally was. Even though the law says slavery is banned, these rich nobles still keep them around like it's no big deal. Hasfer added that Kenta saw a Beastman in the jungle, and those guys are huge targets for slave traders. He figured Loot probably dressed up like a boy there just to keep from being noticed. Kenta says he's staying out of it, but Shamnel reminds him that even though he built the world's box, he never actually messes with anyone's life. But now things are getting way too crazy to handle. It used to be that poor people worked for the rich just to survive. But now it's turned into a total nightmare where people are literally being hunted down and captured. Shamelt wasn't about to let some unfair power system take over, and since they survived the chaos, it was finally time to figure out their next move. You warned everyone that messing with Kenta or Hasfer meant game over, and right then, Shameless Face's expression turned totally evil. Shamuel flashed a wicked grin and warned that anyone who tried to start something would regret it. And with Hasfer looking just as scary while agreeing, poor Kenta was absolutely terrified. He made it clear he just wanted to stay safe and avoid getting hurt, refusing to fight other humans even if it made him look like a total coward. He was totally on board with Kent's plan, and Shamuel said he got it too, suggesting they just sit back and watch how things play out for now. Hasfer told them to grab the saddle tomorrow and let him rest, while he'd personally stick with Kenta on the way to Chester and stay as long as he had to. The next day rolls around and they're standing right in front of the end. Kent finally showed up, and he brought his whole squad of familiars with him. Hasfer spots Hector and says it's been way too long, but Hector just looks at him wondering if they've even met before. He stood there totally confused for a second. Hector told him to follow his lead as they headed to a specific spot. They stood by a window and eavesdropped on the guy from last night talking to the guildmaster, who said that stuff doesn't usually happen in the field, and every adventurer has to handle their... The guy said they'd pay up and asked what the big deal was, then he just wanted to know the price. He suddenly offers to pay double, but the guildmaster stands up and says it's not about the money, because the guild is about helping each other, not just taking orders from some boss. He finally started to get what the guildmaster was saying. The guy just laughed and called it a joke, saying the guildmaster clearly didn't know the first thing about making money. That's why the guild was in such a huge mess, so he ended the talk right there and got ready to head out. As he walked away, the guildmaster barked that he better never show his face there again. The guy walked back to the window and asked if that was finally enough for them. Kent asked if he was the one they were talking about, but the guildmaster just told him not to sweat it. He told Kenta he always knew he'd catch someone eventually since he's way too flashy, and Kenta actually apologized. He asked if the Yussel Trading Company was actually a massive deal in this world. The guildmaster spills the truth. Chester and the other trade groups are the ones really behind everything, while a pawn is actually running a totally different company. Hasfer asked if they should just skip Kentchester and head to Eastupon instead, and Kent was totally down since he didn't want any drama. Hector asks if Kenta would sell his familiars to dodge the Yussel Trading Company, but Kenta shuts him down and says there's no way he's giving them up. Hector grinned and said that Kent really did care about his familiars more than anything. He was honestly just stoked that they all had such an awesome master leading them. The guildmaster stood up and said the drama was finally over, so he asked Ken if they could head out, and Ken thanked Hector before taking off. Hector promised they'd have each other's backs when things got rough and told him to get moving right now. Kenta headed out and made his way straight to Fort Shaw. He asked if he could just hang out until the saddle for Fort Sirius was finished, and Fort told him it was totally cool since it would take a bit longer anyway. He offered them lunch, and Kenta was totally down, saying it sounded awesome. Fort served up a big bowl of sausage and potato stew, a total classic from his hometown. Hasterite thinks it tastes super German. Kent says it's straight up delicious, and Ford knows a cold beer would make this meal perfect. Fort strapped the belt onto Sirius just as Kenta was getting ready to head out. Fort threw his fist up, praying his friends were with him in spirit, while Kent watched from a distance and thanked him for the save. The moment they finally left the town behind, has suggested they should head out even further for a bit. Now Kenta is straight up riding all over Max. Suddenly a rope just snaps right around Nini's neck. He reacts in a total flash and slices right through the rope. Kenta was totally lost and had no clue what was even going on. A squad of riders suddenly appears, and one of them shouts that the cat is already marked, so they need to move fast and snag it. Angard Kentid pulled his sword, but Hasfer stopped him instantly, telling him they had to get way further from the city first. Ken told everyone that they had no choice but to run for it, right as they were booking it out of there. "Can't we just find a spot at the lake?" They mentioned that they'd have to leap right over it. He told his familiar to go all out and clear the gap with one massive leap.
They actually pull it off and finally make it across the lake.
But the guys chasing them ended up face-planting straight into the sand. That same guy who was hunting the familiars was right in the middle of the chase, screaming for Kenta to wait up. He promised Kenta they'd finally lost their tail, but Kenta still couldn't shake the feeling that things weren't okay. Hasfer asked Kenta if he was actually worried about their enemies, saying it was super weird to see him acting so stressed out. Ken says those guys are totally stuck in the shallow sand, and since they've got backup, they're going to be just fine. He was just about to say more when he spotted Hector riding up on a horse. Hector finally showed up to help, and after Kenta gave him a nod, they knew they could just leave the rest of the work for him to handle. Hector agreed and said he'd hit up the guild so backup would arrive in no time. Kenta thanked Hector a million times, but Hector just said Weston is their home, and they'll always look out for other adventurers. Cantor doesn't even think twice and says yes right on the spot. They just hoped their bond would stay unbreakable forever. He started thinking back to the town he called home. Standing there in the spot he had to guard, he couldn't help but feel low-key jealous of Hector and his whole squad.
Hasfer tells the crew they need to start heading east toward a pond right now.
Kent was all in and ready to jump straight into the action. Later that night, the whole squad was chilling back at the Adventurers Guild. Hasfer went to meet the guildmaster, and when the old guy asked where Kenta was, Hasfer just told him he was off on a quick side quest. The old guy said the whole thing was a total roller coaster and that Hector was laughing like a maniac, wishing he could have seen the chaos himself. Hasfer's carrying a little girl with Shaman on his shoulder, asking if any drama went down after they left. But the old man has no clue, making Hasfer wish They asked the guild for some help, but he straight up told them to back off and stay out of it. Just as Hastur turned to leave, the little girl asked if he realized they were being followed. Suddenly, two guys jumped out right in front of Hasfer. They say sorry, but then they immediately threaten to end him. Hasp thought these guys were just Yussel Trading Company clients, but he quickly realized it was all a trap. He moves like a total blur and takes down both guys in an instant. He totally lost it and snatched the guy up by his collar. He yelled at them for being total idiots who couldn't even tell how strong their enemy was. Those guys were totally freaked out and bolted as fast as they could. Hasfer wondered if that was really it, thinking Shane would totally thank him for handling the whole mess. He looked over at little Shuram and told her to help out, and she was totally down for it. Cut to the castle where Dragon is sitting on his throne, telling a guy named Claris that he knows all about the shady stuff he's been up to. Greedy. The dragon roared that Claris wasn't getting away with being lazy and greedy, leaving Claris shaking in his boots and begging for mercy. One more check. The dragon told him that if the forgiveness stops, he has to fix every single mess he made right this second. Claris was totally shook and shouted that this was a sign straight from the gods. The dragon ordered him to cut all ties with the Easton Trading Company and set every single slave free right now. Meanwhile, Shamble and Shuram were hanging out right by the dragon. Shamble gave Shuram a huge thanks for all the help. Shuram told him they still needed to be. He announces he's heading back to Kenta and tells Shuram to handle everything while he's gone. The next morning, Kenta is still totally knocked out when someone tries to wake him up, and he starts wondering if they're actually alone. Or maybe it's actually Lapin or even Shamil. But the second he woke up, he realized things were actually getting serious. She told everyone she finally figured out exactly how to wake him up. Ken made sure to mention that the floor was actually super fluffy. He hopped up to greet the crew and stepped right out of his tent. Kento remembered Hasfer went back to rest yesterday, but he was totally shocked to see a second tent, and realized Hasfer actually bought one too, which Hasfer said just seemed like a great... Ken gets the table ready and tells Sakura to bring out the bread. He told him to just throw on whatever he liked and dig in. They were so greedy that they just had to try every single flavor they could find. Shameful? No way. They were actually hyped for a taste test and grinned as Kenta handed them some food. They asked what it was, and Kenta explained it's just butter and sugar, a snack he used to eat all the time as a kid. Hasfer took a bite and thought it was amazing, so Kenta handed out more sweets and told them they were just like the cookies the others had. He took a taste and said they were fire, hyping up Kenta for being a total master of flavors. They checked the map, and Kenta said they were skipping Chester to head east toward a pond, but he wondered how long it would actually take to get there. Shama tells them they're about 200 reals west of Restum right now. Kenta wondered if rills were how they measured distance around here, and Shamagal gave him a quick breakdown. In this world, 1 kilometer is called a rill, so it's 1,000 rills from Restum to Chester, and 2,000 to reach Eastapon. Kenta asks if a layout works for measuring small distances, but Sham explains that for anything under half a layout, they basically just guess. He even broke down exactly how the weight system works. Kenta was mapping out the 1,800 real journey to the east, and Shamil told him it would take 18 days on horseback, or a solid 40 days if If they try to dodge Chester, this whole trip is gonna take way longer. Shamil asked Kenta if he wanted to find out how that transfer door really works. He pointed out 25 different spots on the map and told them he'd already been to every single one. Ken asked if he could hop from door to door, and Shamil confirmed it, saying this special shortcut is only for a chosen few. Shame suggests they bail through door number 2 since it's right there next to Chester. Kent was totally down, saying it was super handy to be able to reach Bison in the blink of an eye. Shame asks if they should finally get moving. He hesitated for a second, but then he finally agreed to do it. But he also remembered his promise to explore the world with his familiars and just enjoy the ride. He told Shamil he was skipping the shortcut for a real adventure, and Shamil just nodded like he saw it coming, mentioning he might just set sail himself. It's like they'd totally skip the teleport door just to go on the whole adventure together.
The familiars are officially heading out to start the hunt.
Kenta stared at the map and realized this land was absolutely massive, especially since his own home was way smaller than Restum and Eastupon. He thought it was just one tiny island, but there were actually tons of countries everywhere, and Hasfer explained that this world is a massive mix of all kinds of people. Kenta mentioned his country was pretty quiet, but it wasn't a total paradise since they'd been through a ton of huge wars. Hashtag explained that even though each city runs itself, they're all still part of one big nation, and Ken thought that whole idea was actually pretty cool. Shameful pointed out that wars are a total waste of money, saying the military should just focus on keeping things safe instead of starting big fights. Kenta and Shamil were totally on the same page about how important it was to keep the peace.
Kenta saw his family finally coming back and yelled for everyone to get moving.
He asks Hasfer how he travels such long distances, and Hasfer just tells him he usually walks or rides a mount. Whenever things get dangerous, he just hitches a ride on a massive eagle, and Kenta is totally floored as he remembers the 4th one. He explained the eagle was super special to a friend of the old war god, and Kenta's mind was totally blown once he heard a literal god was involved. Suddenly, he senses a strange vibe and realizes it might be Falco, but he's not sure if the eagle will actually let him hop on for a ride. Kent turns to Falco and asks if he can finally ask for a favor after all this time. He hopped onto Falco with his familiar C, scanning the area to see if everyone had actually made it. Barry pops out of hiding and says he'll just fly behind them, so even though Kenta is a bit unsure, he lets him join the squad. As they're zooming across the sky,
suddenly this massive eagle shows up out of nowhere.
She straight up asks Kenta if he's actually the same guy from that other world. Shami recognizes the eagle right away and says it's been forever. Then the bird gives Kenta a massive shout-out for saving their whole world. Kenta told the eagle to just call him Bo's rep and make sure Samuel got all the credit. Shamble was totally caught off guard that Kenta was actually throwing him into the spotlight. The eagle wished them a safe trip, and then soared off into the distance. They're still zooming through the sky. Ken was hyped about how fast they were moving and said they'd be there in a flash, but Shamil suddenly yelled for him to look straight ahead.
He told them they should totally head over to that spot.
That's when he realized they were standing right in front of the transfer door. Shamgal explains that the door is normally invisible and tells Kenta to just close his eye, and you blink twice. The second Kent followed the instructions, the door shifted and turned into a solid rock. As soon as he touched the door, he noticed it was shimmering like crazy, but Shamwell told him that's just how it's supposed to look. Then he told Kenta to blink his eyes 2 more times. Just like that, the door finally popped back into view. Sham explains that it was actually just a big illusion to keep the door hidden from anyone snooping around. Everything here was way more glitchy than Kenta's home, and nothing was what it seemed. But he just shrugged it off and told them to head inside. Shamo told him to reach out and put his right hand on the door. This set off a hidden trap that sent them flying straight downstairs. The whole squad started heading down those crazy steep stairs. The climb was seriously long and steep, and Has warned him to watch his steps so he wouldn't trip. The second they step inside the room, Kant felt exactly like he was riding in an elevator. He spots a door with the numbers 21 to 25 written right on it. He hits the button, and just like that, the whole squad stepped right inside. Samuel tells Kenta to hit the button for where they're headed, and Kenta gets it done without a second thought. Hashtag asked if he knew how this gear worked, and when Kenter said he was used to it, Hashtag was totally impressed and said it was perfect. Finally, they made it to the spot they were looking for. They walked out of the room and Shamewell told them the stairs lead straight to door number 2. They headed straight up the stairs to the next floor.
And he finally stepped out into the open.
He looked up and realized they'd finally reached the first shrine. Kenta stared out, wondering if that was the East and if they could actually make it there. The moment they stepped into town, everyone saw Kentis's familiars and started running away in a total panic. The guards rushed in and completely cut Kentis off. He straight up asked if he was actually planning to raid the East. They warned him straight up that they weren't going to let him get away with that. Kenta kept his cool and told them they were just adventurers, but the gods might not believe a single word he says. But he has to step up and tell the guards to chill out. Ryan finally recognized Hasfer and pointed out how much he'd grown since they last met, and Hasfer just thanked him for noticing. He told them Kenta was a legit adventurer, and this was his crew, so they had to let everyone through. The guards were still acting nervous, so Kent just whipped out his adventurer cards to show them what's up. He promised them everything would be totally fine, and Ryan was down with the plan. They apologized for that sudden Sutton flex and welcomed Kenta to Westapon.
They finally made it inside the city.
Kenta noticed this place was way bigger than Restum, so Hasfer told everyone they should hit the guild first. Kenta asks if Hasfer knows Eastapon too, and Hasfer says he visits every few years, but this is his first time ever arriving from the ground level. Kenta asks Hasfer if he seriously just flew all the way there. Hasfer looked super confused and pointed out the massive river between them, so Kent asked if he'd grabbed a boat, and Hasfer just nodded. He told Kenta he'd lead the way tomorrow since it was already getting way too dark out. They kept moving until they finally made it to the guild. The kid at the front desk greeted them and asked what brought them in. Kent flashes his card and tells them he's ready to officially sign up as an adventurer. The receptionist grabbed the card and slid it right into the machine, and handed it right back to Kenta. As Kenton pulled it back, he realized it looked exactly like the point card. Kenta asked to crash at the guild's place in 2 big rooms, and the kid was totally down to let him stay. Just as they're about to head out, Kenton catches Hasfer reaching for Minnie like he's actually trying to be sweet. Kent told everyone to get some shut-eye because they were heading east first thing tomorrow. The next morning rolls around. Kenta woke up and gave a quick shout-out to his spirit squad. He was totally loving the vibe because the room felt super cozy. He walked into Hasfer's room to say good morning and ask about breakfast, but Hasfer told him he'd already finished eating. Kent grabbed some food and told Hasfer he wanted to scout the town for supplies, so Hasfer offered to show him the ropes. Once they reached the merchant's shop, Kenta told everyone they should finally sell those gems. He agreed to buy every single gem, even after Kent warned him there was a massive stash of them. Right then, a lady walks up to Hasfer and tells him it's been way too long since they last saw each other. Ken was totally blown away by her looks, and she introduced herself as Diamond, the guildmaster. She asked if Kenta was the gem guy, and if he could handle 2,000 stones. But while Kenta was busy asking if any were rare, Diamond just told him to hand over every single one. Right after that, he showed off a massive pile of sparkling gems. He noticed Hashtar Singh was acting totally weird and asked him what was up. Hashtag told them someone was tailing the group, but they didn't seem like they wanted any trouble. Kenta was totally stunned and asked if he'd seen it too, wondering if hanging out with a younger crowd was finally rubbing off on him. He confirmed it and then, totally missing the awkward vibe, he just asked what happened. Hashtag said heading east from Restum would keep them safe from those kids, but Diamond was already worried that they were being followed. She said she'd heard some sketchy rumors about them, and even though they look super flashy, word is their whole branch is actually shutting down. He figured it probably wasn't even that big of a deal. As they're making their way through the streets, everyone is straight up terrified of the familiars Kenty keeps around him. He told his familiars to chill out, promising them it was totally safe and they didn't need to stress about how anyone else would react. A bit later, they hit up an old lady's food stall for a snack, and she gave them a super warm welcome. Kenton looked over and saw that the rice was finally being served. She tells him it's soft rice soup, but he figures out it's actually just rice porridge. She hands him a bowl of food and tells him to dig in. Right as Ken took a huge bite, he was totally getting choked up and started getting super emotional. He took a closer look and realized the dish was actually made with seafood broth and smelled like sweet grains. The food tasted so incredible that he was totally blown away, so he decided to go grab a massive stash of it right then and there. Right after that, Kenta went ahead and grabbed every single ingredient. He said the meal hit the spot and then stocked up on a ton of meat buns and rice. Aqua and Sakura quickly stashed all their items away. Hasfer told Kenta about another guild he wanted him to visit, and Kenta was totally shocked there was even more to see. Hasfer took the lead and showed him exactly where it was.